Hi everyone! So with Megaman recently joining the roster of Sonic Racing Crossworlds, and the announcement of the newest game in the series, Megaman Dual Override, which was announced while I was making this video, pretty much giving me the perfect excuse to make this, I decided to take this opportunity to talk about one of my favorite franchises besides Sonic to spice things up a little bit, because I absolutely love the Blue Bomber. I've been attached to this series almost as long as I have with Sonic. I've played through the classic series more times than I can count. Now, I actually have a big project revolving around Mega Man that is probably going to take a while to complete. But in the meantime, I wanted to take the opportunity to talk about one of Mega Man's defining factors, his collection of weapons. For those unfamiliar with the concept, when Mega Man defeats a Robot Master, you obtain the weapon that said Robot Master used in their battle, which you can use to destroy the more girthy enemies in the game, help with platforming, and can even be used on other Robot Masters as their weaknesses. There are plenty of great weapons in the franchise, but there's also a fair share of crappy weapons. So why not cover all of them, and talk about which one is the most fun, and which one is the most useless. I played through each of the classic Mega Man games, and tried out the many weapons that he can obtain throughout his journeys, determining how useful they are against the many perils you encounter in the series. I actually had to think real hard where I would place some of these weapons. There were plenty of weapons that were initially lower in the list, but after experimenting with them more they got much higher, and vice versa. Before I start, we gotta go over some ground rules for this ranking. Firstly, I'm not gonna include any items that don't belong to the Robot Masters. This includes accessories like the Magnet Beam, the numbered items, or any use of Rush, whether it's from his spring, his jet, or the adapters that he has, as well as other items like the Mega Ball, and other animal buddies like Beat or Tango. Robot Master items only. And of course, we're gonna focus on the classic series, so no Mega Man X or any other series within the franchise. Maybe in the future. I'm also going to rank them based on fun factor, not just based on how powerful they are. There are weapons high up in the list that are less powerful than others, but completely make up for it because of how fun they are to use. And on the opposite side, there are weapons that are technically stronger, but are a little lower, just because presentation-wise, they don't have that much going for them. Anyways, there's a grand total of 109 weapons in the classic series, including Mega Man's 1 through 11, Mega Man in Base, Powered Up, and the Game Boy games. I'm going to try and describe each of these weapons as best as I can, but I'll try not to be too long so the video doesn't take like 4 hours. Also, I'm sure you know this already, but I'm not going to be counting any obscure games in the series, such as the DOS games, the Power Fighters arcade games, or that one WonderSwan game, which I'm sure more than half of you watching didn't know that existed until I mentioned it. Lastly, just to make sure to avoid confusion, I'm going to put in parentheses which game the weapon comes from next to the ranked number, just so you know where it originated from. Also, let me know if you'd like to see more Mega Man videos like this in the comments. This was really fun to make, and I'd love to hear your ideas for what I can do next for this series. So without further ado, let's dive into the bottom of the barrel with the F tier weapons, starting with number 109, which is none other than Spark Shock. Yeah, I'm sure at least some of you knew this weapon would be at the bottom. Spark Shock is far and away the worst weapon in the classic series. Wanna know why? Well, here's how it works. When you shoot this little ball of lightning at an enemy, it stuns them momentarily. Sounds simple, right? Well, here's the problem. Half of the enemies in this game are unaffected by this weapon, because it only affects the enemies with a small amount of health. If you try to shoot the big-sized, or even medium-sized enemies with this thing, the weapon is just gonna bounce off them like it's nothing. And even when you do find an enemy that you can stun, you can't even switch your weapon to kill them. So there's practically no use for this thing in the regular stages. You could stun the Big Eye clones of this game, but they aren't that hard to begin with, and you could even use Hard Knuckle to destroy them in one hit, which feels way more satisfying. It does do damage against a few bosses, specifically Magnet Man, Doc Air, and the first phase of the Wily Machine, but they also have a secondary weakness that deals just as much damage, and they're arguably way more effective against them, except for maybe the Wily Machine. So, yeah, there is almost no reason at all to use Spark Shock in this game. It's sort of better in the Game Boy version since you can switch your weapons in that game, but the enemies aren't really all that strong to begin with. That's all I have to say. This weapon is completely useless. Case closed. Number 108. Time Stopper. This is a really cool idea for a weapon. Having the ability to stop time and take advantage of the hazards and enemies around you, that sounds ripe for some cool strategic platforming. Good thing Time Stopper barely utilizes the idea and has a one-time use. Yeah, Time Stopper sucks. I mean, at least it does its job by stopping time, but once you start using it, you can't unuse it until that bar is completely empty. Which wouldn't be so bad if you were able to attack while time is stopped. So isn't it nice of them to have a time-stopping weapon that doesn't let you attack in any way while nothing is moving? You can't even get a regular buster for this. So if you were hoping to kill a Sniper Joe with his defense down while time is stopped, you're shit out of luck. And there is almost no good time to use it. You can't use it for the disappearing blocks or anything like that because of the single use, and there will always be an enemy in the way. And since you can't shoot, you have to wait until the thing runs out, ironically wasting time. And even if there are obstacles you could probably freeze time on to pass them by, it still won't matter because the energy goes down so quickly. I can think of 4 good uses for this thing. The spiked presses in Metal Man stage, the spiked presses in Wily Castle 2, the lasers in Quickman stage, and Quickman himself. And even then, for the last 2, you can only choose one of these options since they're both in the same stage. So if you use it during the lasers, you'll have a harder time with Quickman, but if you're saving it for Quickman, then you'll have to learn the laser pattern. The damn thing doesn't even kill Quickman in one use either. It only takes away half of his health. Just terrible. Easily the worst weapon of Mega Man 2. Number 107. Super Arm. Yeah, this is a pretty lame weapon as well. Again, it's a cool idea, having the ability to chuck giant boulders at enemies. But there's one little issue that this weapon has. You can only pick up and throw specific types of blocks. That alone I don't really have that much of a problem with. But these select blocks only appear in a handful of stages, and are really only useful for 2 bosses in the whole game. That being Cutman and CWU-01P. Which, even then, for the first one, you're not able to use at all for the rematch of Cutman, because again, you're only able to pick up specific types of blocks that are nowhere to be seen. Is it at least fun to use in the stages it is available in? No, not really, because you throw the damn blocks in an arc, which increases the chance of you missing your target. The block does scatter a bunch of debris when it lands, but they usually miss their targets as well, and sometimes the debris will just clip through the enemies, giving them no damage whatsoever. Wonderful. You're better off using literally any other weapon in the game. And yes, there are areas where you could use Super Arm to make progress, like getting the Magnet Beam in a Like-Man stage, or to get through this blocked area in the first Wily stage. You could use that, or you could use Thunder Beam to destroy the blocks and make the process even faster. So yeah, that kind of makes an already worthless weapon even more worthless, doesn't it? I will say though, this weapon does make the Copy Robot fight fun to watch, because since he can't use it, he can just walk back and forth for all eternity. Look at him go. I want to mention something real quick. There's going to be some weapons here that I'm going to cover a little more briefly compared to other weapons. Mainly because some of these weapons pretty much act the same as other ones I previously mentioned, with minor differences. Case in point, number 106, Deep Digger. Yeah, it's essentially the same as Super Arm. You pick up specific kinds of blocks and chuck them at your enemies. And because of that, it also carries the same major problem that Super Arm had, where it can only be used in a limited amount of stages. And instead of being strong against 2 bosses, this is only strong against 1. And it's a boss you'll only fight once. I mean, in theory it could be used to get items you couldn't reach before, but once you get the Magnet Hand upgrade for your Buster, it becomes completely obsolete. I give this one the slight edge over Super Arm though, because at least you could chuck the blocks straight forward instead of throwing them in an arc. And it does have a neat looking spread attack with the rocks that come out of the blocks. Plus, it's the only weapon in the game that can interact with these kind of blocks, unlike Super Arm where you could use the Thunder Beam. Other than that, yeah, this one kinda sucks as well. Moving on. Okay, for this one, I decided to lump the next 3 weapons together, because they're literally the exact same, with some very, very minor differences. And what a surprise, they're all shield weapons. Numbers 105, 104, and 103 goes to none other than Skull Barrier from Mega Man 4, Star Crash from Mega Man 5, and Plant Barrier from Mega Man 6. These 3 all share the exact same issues. They don't do that much damage, they take more ammo than needed, and they disappear if they slightly touch anything harmful like projectiles or enemies. Though I guess I have to rank them from most bad to least bad. I think Skull Barrier is probably the worst of the 3, because sometimes it can't even block projectiles. What good is a shield weapon if it sometimes can't even do the basic function of shielding you? I guess it can block you from certain hazards, but there are much better options as you'll later see. In the middle of the useless shield is Plant Barrier. It does do a little more damage than the other 2, but that's ruined by the fact that it takes way too much energy for a shield weapon. especially in Mega Man 6 where item drops are surprisingly scarce. It does look funny when you try to shoot it without energy though. That's a plus. And the least bad of the three goes to Star Crash, because you can at least shoot this shield. Again, it disappears the moment it touches anything harmful, but hey, at least it's mildly amusing. Still isn't good. Also, Star Crash in particular is really weird with its weapon energy. You lose 3 or more units if the shield comes in contact with an enemy, and you lose 2 units if you shoot it. Shouldn't it be the other way around? Whatever. The point is that these shields are lame. Next weapon. Number 102. Time Slow. This is such a disappointing weapon, dude. As the name implies, this weapon slows down time. No duh. This could theoretically be used to avoid hazards more effectively, or make certain shielded enemies more vulnerable. Sounds like it can be handy, except that it has a few problems. Like for example, you better use the weapon at the right time for the hazards, because if timed poorly, you'd have to wait even longer for the hazards to cool down. But more importantly, you could only use this thing 2 times per stage. It takes a large chunk of energy. Even if you grab a large energy capsule, it won't fill the weapon energy enough to be able to use it again. If you want to refill this weapon for whatever reason, you would either need to find energy capsules throughout the stage, or grind some energy by killing some respawning enemies. And that's no fun. Here's the thing though, it wouldn't have been down here in the F tier spot if it was a part of a different Mega Man game that didn't have this kind of ability. But it especially feels redundant to use in this game, which already has a weapon that completely immobilizes the enemies, which is far more helpful than just slowing them down. Though credit where credit's due, unlike Time Stopper, you can actually use your weapons while it's active for a brief amount of time, so it has that going for it. Besides that, I think this is a waste of a creative idea. Number 101. Hyper Bomb. Bomb weapons are weirdly inconsistent in Mega Man. They can either be some of the best items in the franchise, or they can be complete duds. Quite literally. Hyper Bomb is probably the biggest offender in this regard. It should be simple. You chuck a bomb, and when it detonates, it makes a big explosion. It really could have been helpful for some of the more girthy enemies in Mega Man 1, especially since it has a pretty good blast radius. The one fatal flaw though is that it doesn't detonate when it comes in contact with an enemy. You have to wait until the bomb blows up, and most of the enemies in Mega Man 1 are constantly moving, so good luck trying to get the Big Eye to be hit by the bomb that takes like 3 weeks to detonate. You could freeze the enemies with Ice Slasher to give the bomb more of a chance to hit its target, but is it really a good sign if you need another weapon's help to have any use? Yeah, there's a reason why Gutsman and Bombman were never put in the Game Boy games. Well, other than the fact that they couldn't fit all the robots in that game, but you get what I mean by that. Powered Up actually fixed this issue by having it explode on contact, but now it can bounce off the walls, potentially missing your target, and the blast radius is smaller. Why, Capcom? You had a chance to fix this weapon and you soiled it! And with that done and over with, those are all the F tier weapons down. Now on to the E tier weapons. These are weapons that had the potential to be pretty cool to use, but are completely ruined because of 1 or 2 issues that hold them back from being fun to use. They're different from the F tier weapons because they at least do their job as weapons, and can actually help you in very rare instances, and they aren't as situational, but ultimately, they're still pretty useless for the most part. So let's just get these underwhelming weapons out of the way. Number 100. Bubble Lead. Wow, Mega Man 2. First a time-stopping weapon you can't switch out of, and now bubbles. How exciting. And, look, it's not like bubble weapons are inherently a bad idea. They could work if you do something creative with them. In fact, there's one later on that's actually pretty high in the list. But this thing is just lame. All this thing does is move through the ground until it either hits a wall or an enemy. Best part about this thing is that it has no effect on 70% of the enemies. It even bounces off the small enemies like these tellies, which takes 1 hit from nearly every other weapon. Yeah, this weapon is nearly useless. The only reason it's not F tier is because it can take out a couple enemies more effectively than other weapons. It's a very small amount, but at least it does damage to something. Not to mention it does help for the fake floors on Wily Stage 4, and it is the weakness of the final alien boss, but other than that, it's just awful. Might not be as bad as Time Stopper, but it's so close. Number 99. Sakugarn. Hey, have you ever wanted to use a pogo stick as a weapon? No? Well then, you're not gonna like Sakugarn. Yeah, this thing is about as exciting as it sounds. Basically, you use it to jump on enemies. You get this thing by defeating Quint and can only use it in 1 stage of the entire game. which is the final level. Now you think that would be the reason why I put it this low, but no, that's actually not it at all. There are some useful weapons that can be used in final stages. In fact, one of them is an S tier weapon despite being used in one stage. The problem is that this final stage almost never gives you a proper chance to use this thing. Most of the stage either has enemies that are tucked in cramped rooms, or has wide open areas with no enemies whatsoever. With all that said, the reason why this weapon isn't in F tier is because at least this thing can deal a decent amount of damage in the spots where you can use it. And it is the weakness of the final phase of Wily, which even then is more situational than helpful. You can jump on spikes. That's a plus. Yeah, this isn't very useful. I mean, this thing was so lame that it was even excluded from Mega Man 10. Every other Mega Man killer weapon got in there, but not Sakugarn. That is depressing. Number 98, Crash Bomber. On the opposite end of underwhelming bomb weapons, we have this weapon crashing in. Basically, this weapon sticks to the walls, and like Hyper Bomb, takes a few seconds to detonate. Yeah, getting the major issue out of the way, there aren't that many enemies that are near the walls. So, good luck trying to find a spot where you could use this weapon. And even if you do find a spot, chances are it still doesn't work, because they're immune to it. Now, unlike Hyper Bomb, this actually does do contact damage, but it doesn't explode on impact. To be fair though, it does take out some smaller enemies, and can even take out a couple of the more annoying enemies of the game, like the Blockies and the Snailbots. But come on, where's the fun of using an explosive item that damages enemies without the explosions? I mean, technically it does explode on impact against shielded enemies like Mets or Sniper Joes, but there are many other ways to kill the Mets, and Sniper Joes in Mega Man 2 seem to be immune to explosives, even when unshielded. And yet it can take out Wily's big machine in one well-aimed shot. Anyways, it's a mild improvement over Hyper Bomb, but we still have a long way to go until we get to the Great Bomb weapons. Oh yeah, and I almost forgot to mention that this thing can blow up certain types of walls. But I never usually blow them up, because I'm saving them for the stupid Buoy Beam Trap boss in Wily Stage 4, which requires using almost all of your ammo, which you can't afford to screw up multiple times, otherwise you'll have to get a game over and do that stage over. What a well-designed boss fight. Number 97, Power Stone. Power Stone, Power Stone, Power Stone. What an unfortunate weapon you turned out to be. So what this weapon does is that you fire 3 stones that spiral around until they leave the screen. In theory, it should be helpful for killing the enemies that are out of your reach. But what holds this thing back is the fact that it doesn't seem to hit anything. It almost always misses your intended target, and it usually gives them a chance to hit you. The blocks are also surprisingly frail. If the blocks hit any projectile that the enemies shoot out, they either disappear on contact with them, or they can actually bounce off the damn projectiles. Even the tiny ones coming from Mets. But I think one of the biggest issues that this weapon has is that it goes counterclockwise, making it less likely to hit the enemies, as well as not being able to hurt certain enemies at the bottom since their weak spot is usually their head. I don't know if it would be stronger, but I feel like if you were able to shoot the rocks clockwise, you would at least be able to aim at the enemies in some way, and have more opportunities to hit them. But even beyond that, it just needs to be a little bit more durable. Despite being 3 large rocks, the damage that these stones can do is just puny. It can't even take out the medium-sized enemies with all 3 of the stones, never mind the large enemies. I don't think this item is completely worthless though. There are rare instances where it can be helpful taking out the smaller enemies that are surrounding you, but those are very few and far between. Bottom line, it's a very underwhelming weapon. It's honestly a shame. It had the potential to be a pretty solid rock weapon, but Mega Man 5 found a way to screw it up. Number 96, Charge Kick. Hey, would you look at that? We follow up one Mega Man 5 weapon with another. This is one of the many close-range weapons in the franchise. And believe it or not, there's actually quite a few solid ones in the franchise. Charge Kick isn't one of them. Plain and simply, you use the slide while this weapon is chosen, and you activate the kick. Getting the positives out of the way, it does help for the few enemies that are on the ground, like these mice or these cannons, and it can get through the gas popping out of these broken pipes in Waveman stage. And there are a few instances where the kick can help you get through certain enemies unharmed, and I guess that can be helpful for speedrunning. But even with that in mind, it's still a very situational weapon where it'll most likely be you that's taking damage instead of the enemies. The main issue with this weapon is that most of the enemies in the game are either floating in the air, moving frantically, or elevated to a level where you can't hit their weak spot. And even if there is an enemy that's on the ground, There's a chance that they'll either be placed on a short platform or besides a wall. Also, if you time your kick poorly, you're just taking a hit. That's really all I have to say about this weapon. There's plenty of weapons after that handle this concept much better. You could say I don't get a kick out of this weapon. Number 95, Blizzard Attack. Ice weapons are usually pretty solid in Mega Man games, and can make for some very creative weapon ideas. And then there's Blizzard Attack. Basically you spawn 4 little snowflakes behind you, and they spread out for you to get a higher chance to defeat the enemies. I guess the spread can sometimes be efficient in certain areas of the game, and it can take down these mostly invincible floor enemies in one hit, unlike most other weapons in the game. But the damage on this thing is just pathetic. I mean, I guess that's expected when using tiny snowflakes as weapons, but you could have at least made them a little more powerful, or gave them some kind of effect for the enemies, like making them move slower or something. Especially for a weapon that takes 3 bars of energy. That doesn't sound like much, but most of the time, these snowflakes will miss their targets and waste not only your ammo, but your time as well. Yeah, not much else to say. This weapon just blows. By the way, I'd like to mention something real quick. There's only so many ways I can say whether a weapon is great or lame, so I apologize if my conclusions for these segments come off as repetitive. Just throwing that out there. Anyways, Blizzard Attack sucks. Moving on. Number 94, Atomic Fire. For the first fire-based weapon on the list, unless you count the explosives, in which case this is the third, we have this weapon. This thing is kind of like a prototype for Mega Man's very own Charge Buster. When you shoot normally, you get a little fire pellet, but when you hold the attack button, it charges up and the flame gets bigger the longer you charge it. When fully charged, it shoots a big fireball at your enemies. Sounds like it would be pretty cool to use, but once again, it all goes back to how much energy it takes. The charge shots take way too much energy, with it getting 4 uses when only charged a little bit, and only getting 2 shots when fully charged. And you better use this weapon wisely, because if you're charged up and happen to either miss your target or realize that an enemy is immune to this weapon, guess what? You just wasted 4 seconds for nothing. And even if you do make your mark, you'll still lose a significant portion of energy, so you're better off just using other weapons. To be fair though, it is pretty good for the mini-bosses like these anglerfish or these giant dogs, not to mention taking out Sniper Joes in one hit, which is efficient, but overall, it's just an underwhelming weapon to use. Though fun fact, this can actually heal Heatman in your rematch against him. It doesn't help whatsoever, but it is funny to look at. Number 93, Topspin. Well, now it's time to talk about the weapon that people usually put low in their list. So here's the thing about Topspin. While I don't like it, I don't think it's that bad conceptually. You jump and spin around, theoretically damaging whatever enemy comes in contact with it. And being honest here, there actually are a few instances where Topspin can be helpful. It can take out some of the smaller enemies pretty well. Key word here being some. It can kill these dragonflies effectively. It takes care of these jumping monkeys in Hardman stage, as well as these bolts in Sparkman stage. But bear in mind, those are rare instances. Let's talk about the 3 flaws this weapon has. First, the minor one. When you do come in contact with a smaller enemy you can damage, you get a little knockback. It's not really a huge deal for the most part, but for areas like this, it's pretty inconvenient. Secondly, this thing is insanely inconsistent with its energy. When killing most of the smaller enemies, it works just fine, but when you use it on the larger enemies, and even a few of the smaller enemies, they can take a significant portion of energy. Like, look at this! These are just a few measly bees, and one use of Topspin took away all of my energy. But the biggest flaw with this weapon is that besides the enemies I've mentioned, and a few bosses, this thing does no damage to a lot of the bigger enemies. The only kind of damage that usually comes out of using this weapon is for yourself. So in conclusion, while I don't think it's the absolute worst weapon in the game, especially since it does share the same game with Spark Shock, I can't deny that this is a pretty bad weapon overall. With that said, it's insanely funny seeing Gamma, this giant bulky robot, be defeated by using a little ballerina twirl in the air. In fact, most of the Fortress bosses are actually weak to it. How ironic. Number 92, Gemini Laser. Speaking of sharing weapons in the same game, we have Gemini Laser coming in. Basically, this shoots a laser that ricochets off the walls until it either hits the target or disappears. Could be useful for the more hard to reach enemies, and it does fine enough damage I suppose. But of course, there's a huge asterisk, because you can only shoot one laser at a time. You can't shoot another one until it either hits an enemy or leaves the screen, and you can't switch your weapons while it's activated. So like Atomic Fire, you need to aim carefully or know for a fact that the laser will hit an enemy after bouncing off the walls. Otherwise, you'll have to wait around 5 seconds just for the laser to disappear. If I had my way with this weapon, I would have it move faster and make you able to shoot 2 at a time, and also be able to switch out your weapons while the laser is on screen. But alas, we were given this lame laser instead. Number 91. Chill Spike. Yeah, I bet some of you were expecting a certain electric-based item to be the lowest Mega Man 10 weapon on the list. Nah man, I find Chill Spike worse. Basically, you shoot a piece of frozen liquid, and when it hits the ground or wall, it forms frozen spikes, and if it hits most of the enemies, it'll freeze them temporarily. The spike itself does fine enough damage, and it does take out the smaller enemies that do happen to land on it, which isn't really that much. Yeah, the spike itself is lame. Most of the enemies in the game are either airborne or stuck in one spot, so you'll rarely ever use it for the enemies that do move. And while the spike itself does do decent damage, the icy blob of liquid itself hardly does any damage at all. Not to mention, you can only shoot one in the ground, though thankfully you can get rid of them quickly by switching weapons. But still, it feels like a waste of ammo. It does freeze most of the enemies it hits, and the game still allows you to switch weapons while they're frozen, which I do appreciate, but I don't know, that isn't really enough to make this weapon good. See, Ice Slasher had the same idea, but that was fun in Mega Man 1 because for that game's standards, it was incredibly useful for certain enemies. Here, it's just a secondary feature, and the main feature it has is kinda lame. And even then, it doesn't shoot straight forward at the enemies. You have to get close to them in order to freeze them. Though it does have one more positive thing. It can freeze the cars and trucks in Nitro Man stage, and can even destroy them with the spike. That's something at least. Number 90. Wild Coil. Now, this is an interesting idea for a weapon. With this activated, you shoot 2 springs on each side, and you can even charge them for the springs to be a little stronger. You're even able to control how high the springs can bounce by holding up or down on the D-pad while shooting after the charge. Holding up makes them bounce higher, while holding down makes them do very tiny bounces. I really like that idea, but I don't know. Despite said cool idea, I feel like they didn't really utilize it very well in execution. My 2 biggest issues is that 1, the damage is pretty pitiful even when charged, and 2, this thing just doesn't really have good aim. Some enemies in the game change their positioning constantly, which makes it pretty annoying trying to aim at certain enemies. There aren't that many spots that make this weapon useful. If they come in contact with any walls, they'll just disappear. If they acted more like the ones that Springman himself uses, which is bouncing off the walls, then it would have made the springs more versatile and fun to use. But as is, it's a pretty disappointing weapon. It does work well for the final boss though, gotta give it that. Number 89. Centaur Flash. By far the lamest screen nuke weapon in the series. Centaur Flash plain and simply flickers the screen and kills anything that's on screen. The main issue I have with this weapon is a combination of 2 things. 1, it doesn't do enough damage to certain enemies, and 2, for a weapon with not so high damage, it takes way more energy than needed. If they just picked one of these things, then it wouldn't be a big deal. I get that they're trying to balance this weapon to make sure it isn't used constantly throughout the stages, but they just went way too far in the opposite direction. And as a result, it makes the weapon almost useless to use. I mean, I can understand the larger enemies taking more abuse from the weapon, but come on, I can't take out these drill robots in one flash. But aside from all that, it just doesn't feel fun to use. I mean, yeah, I can wipe out every enemy in the room, but it just flickers the screen to wipe them out. It doesn't even feel that fun on Windman, who is weak to this weapon. That's really all I have to say. This is a pretty lame weapon. Number 88. Gravity Hold. Hey, what do you know? We follow up one lame screen nuke weapon with another. I don't have too much to say about this one. It pretty much retains the same issues as Centaur Flash. It's not strong enough, it takes way more energy than needed for a weak weapon, and most of the enemies can take several flashes from it, despite the fact that it's, you know, a gravity switching weapon. The only reason I have it a tiny bit higher than Centaur Flash is because it is mildly amusing to watch the enemies fly up high into the stratosphere. And keep in mind, by the way, this is the last of the E-tier weapons, and I already covered half of Mega Man 5's weapons. This game has pretty bad weapons. And now that the E-tier weapons are done, we can officially move on to the D-tier weapons. These are the weapons that are functional and don't really have any giant deal breakers that makes them completely useless. but they just aren't that fun to use and don't really do much to help you out. So let's jump on into our first D tier. Number 97, Water Wave. Jesus, Mega Man 5, why do you have such an underwhelming set of weapons? Water Wave is basically a slightly upgraded Bubble Lead, as you shoot a wave that travels through the ground. And when I say slightly upgraded, I mean very slightly. Because the only thing this weapon has over Bubble Lead is that this one is able to damage most of the enemies. Besides that, it still isn't very fun to use. This weapon is surprisingly stingy with where you can shoot it. You have to be on the ground when shooting this thing, because if you're jumping or over the edge of a platform, you won't be able to unleash the waves. And it's impossible to use in Gravity Man stage when you're upside down. You do fire 3 waves, but regardless of how many waves you have, the enemies always take a tiny amount of damage, even if all 3 of the waves hit them. Very rarely will the other waves branch off after killing an enemy. And on top of all that, it has the same issues as almost all the other Mega Man 5 weapons. It takes way more energy than needed, and it doesn't do that much damage. I'm not kidding, when I was recording footage for the Mega Man 5 weapons, half the time I was just using my regular Charge Buster because of how fast I was losing energy for these weapons, and because of how ineffective they are in general. They're just so damn weak in this game. And I still have another one to talk about in the next spot! Number 86, Crystal Eye. Really, Mega Man 5? 3 in a row? What is wrong with you? Anyways, Crystal Eye pretty much functions the same as Gemini Laser. The only difference being that instead of one laser bouncing around after hitting a wall, this splits into 3 little crystals that bounce all over the place. Funnily enough, this one actually followed suit to my suggestions to improve Gemini Laser, because not only does this thing move faster, but also, like I mentioned, this crystal splits into 3, giving you a higher chance of hitting the enemies. That's not to mention letting you switch weapons while activated. But of course, despite those fixes, there's still a couple issues holding this one back. For one, while you do get a higher chance of hitting the enemies with the smaller crystal balls, the precision on them is still very wonky, and more importantly, it doesn't do that much damage. And you would think the big crystal would do more damage than the tiny crystals, since obviously it's bigger. But no, both the big and small crystals take the exact same amount of damage. I mean, I guess it's to encourage you to let the crystals split, but still, it would have been nice for the big crystal to have at least twice the damage. Especially for the areas that don't have any walls. Whatever, man. I don't have anything else to say. This weapon is just mediocre. Moving on. Number 85, Magic Card. Being honest, while I'm personally not a fan of Mega Man and Bass myself, I will admit that the weapons this game contains are actually really solid for the most part. With the huge exception of this weapon. Basically, you shoot out cards that return back to you, but not only can it do that, but it can also take items from far away and bring them over to you. That is a very interesting concept, and it makes you think that this weapon might be great, until you realize that this weapon literally has the same amount of damage as your regular Buster. Yeah, as a weapon, this thing is pretty lame. If you try killing most of the enemies with this thing, you'll only be wasting your time. Like, come on, I get that they're cards, but could you at least make them a little bit stronger than your Buster? I guess it could be mildly helpful for the enemies above. And again, the item snatching mechanic is cool, but a cool mechanic can only get you so far when it's so weak in the regular battles. Yeah, I don't have much else to say. Magic Card is lame. Number 84, Windstorm. Hey, I have an idea. Let's take Bubble Lead and turn it into an air weapon. Yeah, that's essentially what Windstorm is. You shoot a little tornado that travels through the floor and disappears as soon as it hits a wall. Most of the criticisms I have with Bubble Lead apply to this weapon as well. It doesn't really do that much damage, and it really only works for the ground enemies, and nothing more. Though it does have a couple aspects that puts it above Bubble Lead. For one, this weapon actually damages nearly every enemy in the game, though there are still some enemies that are immune to it, but still it's an improvement. It also gets points because it takes the enemies high to the sky, and that's funny to see. Aside from that, it's not much better than Bubble Lead. Not much else to say. Number 83, Search Snake. I don't really have that much to say about this one either. This one doesn't act that much different from the previous weapon, the only difference being that this one can climb up walls, which is slightly more helpful, but it still isn't very good. You shoot a snake that travels through the floor and the walls until it either hits an enemy, the ceiling, or the edge of a platform. Once again, half of the enemies in the game are either airborne, or have weak spots that are above their feet, and even if you do hit some of them, they'll still deflect the snakes. When there is an enemy you can hit, it's okay, I guess. It's surprisingly useful for the giant spring enemies, and it does counter these top shooting guys in Top Man stage well. But besides that, it just really isn't all that fun to use. Not much else to say. Number 82, Danger Wrap. I honestly really didn't want to put this weapon so low. I seriously remember this one being fun to use, but upon using it for these stages, I realized that this weapon kinda sucks. Okay, so with this weapon on, you shoot a bubble with a bomb inside it that floats upwards. You can shoot it in different directions depending on how you hold the D-pad. If you're pressing nothing, then it moves like how it normally would. If you're shooting while running, the bubble will go further. If you're holding up on the D-pad, it moves straight above. And finally, if you hold down, you could actually drop the bomb without the bubble. So it at least has some variety of how you could use it. But the bubble itself just doesn't do enough damage to the enemies. The only thing that slightly does more damage is when you just drop the bomb, which even then, in order to do that, you would have to stand right next to the enemies, which could potentially damage you in the process. I don't know why the bubbles couldn't explode either. I mean, they have a bomb in them. It could have been used to make some cool trick shots on the enemies that are further away, which is sometimes the case for a few enemies. It is pretty funny seeing the tiny enemies trapped in the bubbles, and you can humiliate Cloudman with a well-timed shot as you enter his room. But god, what a waste of a fun idea. Number 81, Thunderwool. Honestly, of all the infamous weapons in this list, I feel like Thunderwool is probably the biggest missed opportunity of them all. Because I do think this weapon has good qualities. Basically, you shoot at a small cloud, and it fires a bolt of lightning down. The lightning itself actually does some pretty decent damage. It can take out larger enemies in just a couple hits, and a lot of smaller enemies that come in contact with the lightning get destroyed easily. I really like the idea that's being presented here. With that in mind, this weapon has the potential to be pretty useful, and in certain instances, it actually is. But it's completely ruined because of that one fatal flaw, that being the fact that the wool you shoot out is about as fragile as, well, wool. If anything touches this cloud, it will disappear and the lightning will not be activated. I feel like this one was probably the easiest one to fix. Just make the cloud more durable so that it stays longer. Or hell, maybe if it gets hit, it could split into 4 little lightning balls that splits diagonally or something. I don't know. I seriously think this weapon might have had the potential to be good. Maybe even a great one. You might be wondering why I didn't put it in E tier since this does have a huge setback. Well, it's because I feel the fatal flaw of this weapon is not as egregious as something like Power Stone or Atomic Fire. And again, it does have its moments where it can actually be helpful, but like the previous spot, this is such a waste of a cool idea. Number 80, Freeze Cracker. Okay, I swear the ice weapons get better. We just have one more mediocre ice weapon to talk about. This one has you shooting a big ice crystal that splits into 6 tiny snowflakes upon hitting a hard surface. You're also able to shoot in higher and lower angles, making it pretty decent for aiming. But again, one of the big factors here is the damage, and it doesn't do much in that department. I mean, it's a little bit stronger than the Buster, but you're only able to shoot one at a time, and there's a little bit of a cooldown before you could shoot again. So really, you might as well just be using your regular Buster. You could use it to freeze the Molten Steel in Junkman stage, change the weather in Cloudman stage, and freeze the flames in Turboman stage. That's pretty cool, being able to interact with some of the environments around it, especially for Cloudman where you get one of the rush letters and have a better view of the platforms. It's also pretty funny using it on Slashman and seeing him slip and slide while being frozen, and this could actually heal Freezeman a little bit after striking a pose. Much like Heatman, that isn't helpful, but it's a fun detail nonetheless. Thankfully, this is the last mediocre ice weapon. It's only up from here, folks. Number 79, Oil Slider. This is a semi-close range weapon that's a slight improvement over Charge Kick, but it still isn't very good. This one has you shoot out a puddle of oil, which doesn't seem like much, but when you walk over the oil, you form a board out of it, and you're able to surf through the stages. Before we get into my issues with it, it does have a few things I like about it. It is actually pretty good at speeding through the more horizontal areas of the game, and it's actually really cool that you could surf over the water using it since it's made of oil. You're also able to control your speed on the board with the D-pad, so if you want to slow down for platforming, you hold the D-pad in the opposite direction you're going, and if you want to speed up, you hold the D-pad forward. And I think that was a pretty smart move on their part. And now on to my issues with the weapon. Sometimes you can slide over the enemies without an issue, but other times you'll have to jump in order to hit them, because if you just ram into those enemies, you'll be taking a hit. I mean, at least it doesn't stop you from using the board, but come on. There's also this issue where you can only shoot one at a time, so if you miss your shot and potentially have it land on some spikes, you'd have to wait until the oil disappears until you can shoot again. I wouldn't really mind that much if the oil itself did more damage than your buster, because oh my god, this little blob of oil is puny. It can take half of, or even 3/4 of your energy just to kill even a smaller enemy. I mean, I guess that makes sense when you're shooting something that makes machines move better, but it's still really annoying. It also loses points because it doesn't synergize with Firestorm. Boo! Again, it has its qualities, certainly more so than Charge Kick or Topspin, but not enough to make it fun. Look, Megaman Powered Up, I love you, but the 2 weapons you introduced are just duds. And that covers the D tier weapons. Now we enter the C tier weapons. These are weapons that aren't that reliable, but are ultimately inoffensive. They're the kind of items you use every once in a while, where you could say, sure, why not, and get some mild use out of them. Without any more stalling, let's get to them. Number 78, Napalm Bomb. We finally got to a Mega Man 5 weapon that's just okay, rather than mediocre or bad, but it's still not great. Napalm Bomb is basically a ground weapon where you drop bombs that look like peanuts, which can do damage to whatever enemy they hit on impact. Unlike Water Wave, this one actually bounces off walls, and you could shoot it wherever you want. Not to mention, you get plenty of energy for this weapon. It's one of the better Mega Man 5 weapons, and it might technically be the strongest weapon besides the Charge Buster, but it still doesn't feel that satisfying to me. My issue with this weapon is that despite being functional and doing its job damaging enemies, you rarely get an explosion coming out of it. You do get them for some of the smaller enemies, but for any other enemy, all you get is just a regular tiny explosion. And the big explosions only happen after the last hit. Why can't it just explode anytime it hits an enemy? For balance? Who cares? It's a fucking bomb weapon, just commit to it. I'm sorry if I sound like I'm getting frustrated. Ultimately, I do think this is an alright weapon at the end of the day. It's just that it really shouldn't be this hard to make a bomb weapon fun. Just have it blow shit up and you're home free. Number 77, Rolling Cutter. For the boomerang weapon in this list, and the entire series, Rolling Cutter is a pretty decent first impression. For this weapon, you throw a pair of scissors, and it comes right back to you, all while hurting any enemy that comes in contact with it. It is pretty effective for a few annoying enemies in the game, like these ground enemies in several stages, and these orb guys in a Lekman stage, as well as being pretty convenient for enemies that are scattered around. I just wish it was a little stronger. It does do some damage to the enemies like the Sniper Joes, but it takes a surprising amount of ammo in order to kill them properly. And for the big eyes, I don't think it damages them at all. Plus, it can be a little annoying to use against the Lekman, since he moves so frantically. Maybe it would be overkill, but I think it would be cool if you were able to shoot 2 at a time. That would have made the weapon more versatile and fun to use. But it's fine regardless. Number 76, Photon Missile. This is a very weird weapon to me. Basically, you shoot a missile that has a 1-second delay, and then fires straight forward. I think this should be a strong weapon in theory, but it has a few things holding it back. It does do pretty well against mini-bosses, except for the one in Pluto stage, and the delay can be helpful for the more frantic moving enemies like these birds, but that's really where the advantages of this weapon ends. On one hand, it can be pretty satisfying to hit your target after aiming carefully with the missile, but on the other hand, the delay can feel like it goes on a bit too long, and you'll miss your chance if the enemy is either moving or shielding themselves. And I know some people might say, just get close and use it at point blank range. But come on, where's the fun in that? Also, I'm not really a fan of how the damage remains the same once it starts moving. Plus, it's pretty inconsistent with its piercing ability. Like, sometimes it's able to pierce through enemies, usually the smaller ones, but other times it just disappears on impact like any other weapon. Other than those issues, it's a fine enough weapon that can take down a few enemies quicker than others, but not a go-to weapon of mine for Mega Man World 5. Number 75, Water Balloon. Yeah, this is also a pretty decent weapon. I honestly don't really have that much to say about this one. All you do with this weapon is shoot a ball of water, and that's really all there is to it. It is a little faster than your Buster, and it does slightly more damage than it as well. While it can be effective, it's not all that satisfying to use either. I mean, all you do with this weapon is mash the attack button to soak your enemies. That's it. I do like the amount of ammo it has, but that's really all the great things about it. It's not really good for most of the mini-bosses because it's comparatively weaker than other weapons in this game. I do like how it can extinguish the flames of these fire mets. That's pretty cool at least. Not much else to say. It isn't bad to use, but it isn't very exciting either. Number 74, Thunderclaw. This one makes an electric beam which can not only be used as a weapon, but also as a grappling hook for these specific hooks, I guess? I think they're supposed to be lampposts, but I'm not entirely sure. You'll only see these hooks in 3 stages of the entire game, that being Searchman Stage, Swordman Stage, and Wily Stage 1. As a weapon, it's pretty decent. It can destroy rows of tiny enemies, which I like. Other than that, the damage on this is pretty standard. I kind of wish that it could go through the enemies and maybe score a few more hits, but who knows, maybe that would have been too overpowered. There is a cool thing you can do with it, where if you time your attack just right before landing, you could demolish the enemies in one shot, but there are faster and more satisfying ways of destroying the enemies. I will say, it is odd that this weapon comes from a clown robot of all things. Number 73, Mirror Buster. This is one of 3 returning Game Boy weapons that's in Mega Man 10. It's worth noting that I'll mainly be talking about how they are in Mega Man 10 rather than their Game Boy counterparts, since you can use them in more than one stage, unlike the Game Boy games where each of them can only be used in one, but I'll mention them for comparisons. Anyways, Mirror Buster is a pretty decent weapon. You get this one from defeating Anchor. Basically, you spawn a shield in front of you, and any projectile that hits the shield blasts back at them with a shockwave. You have to be careful with your aiming, because you need to make sure the projectiles hit your shield. Sometimes it's not hard at all since they shoot forward, but other times there will be enemies that shoot their projectiles in an arc. So you need to make sure you know which spot you have to be in to activate the shield and reflect that. I do think the damage is alright, but I think it could be a little stronger. It has no effect when it comes in contact with enemies, so that makes it useless for the enemies that don't shoot. It's not really a huge deal since half of the enemies in the game can shoot at you, but still, maybe a tiny bit of damage would have been pretty cool. Strangely enough, I actually prefer how this weapon was handled in the game it originated from rather than how it was done in Mega Man 10. Because in that game, it was not only able to reflect straight ahead of you, but it was also able to reflect projectiles in any direction depending on where it was shot. Almost like a mirror. Still though, how it is in Mega Man 10 isn't bad, but it's easily the weakest of the 3 Mega Man killer weapons. Number 72, Dive Missile. It's been a hot minute since we talked about a Mega Man 4 weapon. Let's get into this one. It's alright. There isn't too much to say about this one. It's just a homing missile, and nothing more. It's effective, but not powerful. It does a pretty good job taking down some of the smaller enemies that fly around, and it can even take out a few of the more durable enemies like the mummies in Pharaoh Man stage, and surprisingly demolishes the Ring mini-boss in Ring Man stage. I just wish it did a little bit more damage to the larger enemies, and while I'm glad it does its job well on the smaller enemies, there are some faster alternatives to destroy them in this game. Honestly, if Dive Missile was a part of a different Mega Man game, it probably would have been a whole lot higher in the list. But because it's in Mega Man 4, a game where most of the weapons are great, it's gonna be put down here. Also, there are times where the targeting can be pretty wonky, as it sometimes spins around the enemies and completely misses them. Dive Missile, the target is right fucking there. Just turn around! Number 71, Lightning Bolt. This is a fine enough screen nuke weapon. You just pause for a moment and unleash a storm to destroy the enemies. It does its job pretty well, and it does wipe out a lot of the enemies on screen, not to mention make you temporarily invincible, which is a huge plus. But this is probably one of the weaker screen nuke weapons, because some of the enemies either take more bolts than others, and sometimes it can't even kill the shielded enemies even with exposed weak spots. Seriously? Hell, there are some enemies that are barely on screen, and the bolts will somehow miss them. Great. Despite that, it is useful in cases where you just want to say fuck it and demolish the annoying enemies on screen a little faster. And it is mildly satisfying to look at, but it still isn't too exciting. I mean, it's more fun than Centaur Flash or Gravity Hold since it at least has some kind of spectacle, but it still has its flaws. Number 70, Astro Crush. This weapon is pretty much the same as the previous one. It's a screen nuke weapon that makes you hold still for a little bit, the only difference being instead of spawning a lightning barrage, you're creating a meteor shower. It does a pretty good job wiping out every enemy on the screen, and it can even unlock some hidden things like flooding more of Aquaman's stage and breaking the ice in Frostman's stage. Not to mention using it in Wily Stage 1 gives you some extra airtime. which is greatly appreciated considering how hard that segment is. But that's really all there is to it. Not much else to say. Number 69, Blazing Torch. So real quick before I get into this one, it's worth noting a couple things, because Mega Man 11 weapons are slightly more complicated to talk about. Firstly, I'll mainly be talking about how the weapons are normally rather than how they are with the power gear, since they take a huge chunk of energy, despite how powerful they are. Though make no mistake, they will have some factor in their placement. Except for one weapon where it's a huge factor. And secondly, some of the clips shown here will show that I'm using a weapon despite having no energy. That's because I was using the Awakener chip, which is available after beating the game, and it allows you to use weapons without losing energy for them. Got that? Let's move on. You think a fire weapon from a kung fu master like Torchman would be more grand, but what we got isn't too bad, I suppose. Basically, you shoot a fireball that goes up a little bit, and then flies down like a comet. And when you're using the power gear, you can shoot 3 at a time. It can be pretty good for the enemies that are a little more above and below. And I do like that it kills enemies that are shielded, even though half of the weapons in this game can also do that. But hey, it's still a pro nonetheless. But I do feel that sometimes the aiming can be a little off. And the fireballs can sometimes barely miss their targets even with the power gear on. Oh, come on! And holy shit, this thing sucks at dealing with mini-bosses. It does not take them out quickly, besides maybe the balloon frog. It's alright overall, but I think there are faster, more effective weapons in this game. Number 68, Drill Bomb. Okay, out of all the weapons that got into C tier, the one I was most disappointed to see get in here was this one. I was seriously hoping I would put this weapon higher in the list. I mean, not only is it a bomb weapon, but it's a bomb weapon you could actually detonate even before it hits anything. By pressing the attack button again after firing, you can detonate this bomb while it's still in the air. Which, by the way, that info is essential for the second phase of the Wily machine in this game. You would think a weapon like this would be very useful. I mean, big bombs equals big damage, right? But there's a big setback that brings this weapon down here. It's that despite being a bomb weapon, it's weirdly inconsistent with what kind of enemies it can damage. For example, it can destroy both of these big enemies in 2 hits compared to other weapons which usually takes more hits, and yet the jumping fish enemies that can be killed in 1 hit by almost every other weapon in the game, including Skull Barrier, is fucking immune to Drill Bomb of all things. And that's not the only case of the inconsistency. Some enemies for some reason are more durable against the bomb than the bigger enemies. It even extends to the mini-bosses. Like look, this mini-boss in Ringman stage takes 2 hits, but this whale mini-boss in Dive Man stage takes more abuse from the bomb more than other weapons in this game. I don't really know why it's like that. It also has this issue where the blast radius is very deceptive. There are some instances where I feel like I got the enemy within the bomb's reach, only for them to somehow not take damage from the bomb despite being within the blast radius. Though with all that said, I would still put it in C tier, since I do feel that when it's useful, it's very useful. Again, it does a great job against the big enemies like the Big Eye stand-ins, and it does do some damage to most of the enemies in the game. But man, I feel like it could have been so much more. Number 67, Yamato Spear. Yeah, I'm just gonna get straight to the point here. This weapon is alright. You shoot a spearhead that pierces through not only enemies, but through the shields of the enemies too. I don't have that much to say here. It's just a pretty decent weapon. I do like how fast it moves. It makes enemies and even mini-bosses go down quicker than usual. And the shield-piercing aspect is definitely a big plus, but once again, it isn't that strong. And while it does pierce through most of the shields, there are a few enemies that could deflect the weapon in some way. I mean, at least it's enemies that would understandably deflect them, like the Mets that are fully shielded, and these pole-swinging enemies that can knock them away. But it's a fine weapon otherwise. Number 66, Quick Boomerang. Here we have another okay boomerang weapon. Much like Rolling Cutter before, this shoots a boomerang. Though despite the smaller size of this weapon, it's quick, has good range, and you could shoot multiple at a time. I do like that this weapon has plenty of energy, and I'm also a fan of the fact that you could shoot multiple of them just by holding down the attack button. It can be effective for defeating some of the smaller enemies, as well as doing a surprisingly good job against the Sniper Joe mechs, but it does take a certain amount of hits for some other enemies in the game. If it just took a little more damage, you'd have a great weapon on your hands, but alas, it's just alright. The funniest thing about this weapon is that you can beat the game without using it on any of the Robot Masters. Yeah, people forget that this weapon is one of the weaknesses of both Metal Man and Bubble Man, mainly due to a certain weapon that gets the job done quicker. which is very ironic given the title of this weapon. Number 65, Needle Cannon. This is probably the most neutral weapon of the entire West. Needle Cannon is probably the most neutral weapon in the entire list. This weapon simply shoots 3 needles that can rapidly be fired by holding down the attack button. Basically, it's like your Buster if it had a slightly bigger hitbox, did a little more damage, and if it had a rapid fire option. It could take down some enemies more quickly than your regular Buster, and it does do a good job taking down the forklift robots and the giant Mets in the revisiting of his own stage, but for the most part, it only feels like a slight upgrade to your Buster, and nothing more. I think if it had a piercing ability similar to Yamato Spear or Laser Trident, it would make for some more satisfying uses of this thing, but whatever, it's a very inoffensive weapon otherwise. Number 64, Commando Bomb. Another fine enough bomb weapon to add to the list. You shoot out a missile that you can change the direction of, though you're only able to do that 2 times before the aiming is locked. I do like how far the explosion goes both in blast radius and how it spreads. The blast radius can reach pretty far and can even reach enemies on the ground even if the bomb hits the ceiling. And the spread does a great job scoring multiple hits on enemies. You can actually save yourself if you're tucked into a corner and an enemy is closing in, by shooting the bomb at the nearest wall. The problem is though, is that the missile itself is useless for attacking. It pretty much has the same issue as Thunderwolf does, although not as egregious, since you can at least control the missile. But still, I really don't get why the bomb itself does very little damage. Like, it's a bomb. It should explode on contact, or at the very least do some significant damage to the enemies. You could make the argument that it would kind of defeat the purpose of how it functions, but still, I think it would have been nice to have a slight alternative for the airborne enemies, and the enemies on small platforms. You also have to make sure you're standing still if you want to aim this thing. It's easy to forget about that while you're in the heat of battle dodging projectiles. Not to mention, this thing takes way more ammo than it should for a weapon like this. I mean, it's a fine weapon at the end of the day, but it isn't even the best bomb weapon you get in this game. We'll get to that soon. Number 63, Break Dash. We're at our first above average close ranged weapon. Not by too much mind you, but it's still pretty decent. Basically you do this shoulder attack after you charge yourself up. The longer you hold the charge, the farther you can get with it. I do like the damage this weapon does, and I really like how you get a brief amount of invincibility after you use it. It's actually really helpful for passing projectiles shot by enemies, and if you hit your target but happen to fall into spikes, they give you some wiggle room to escape instant death, which I think was a very smart move. It is much better than Charge Kick, but it still has a few issues. You won't be able to use it for some of the enemies, because they can be on platforms that are too small to properly hit them. Also, if you aren't careful with this weapon, you might find yourself charging into a pit and taking a life away. I'm not gonna lie, part of me wishes they should have just ditched the charging aspect, and just let you use it with the push of a button. And whose bright idea was it to make this the weakness for a boss that constantly shakes the floor? Otherwise, it's a fine weapon. Number 62, Air Shooter. And here we have our final C tier weapon. This weapon shoots 3 tornadoes that flies up to the top of the screen. The range is pretty good for a weapon that flies up, and it's actually quite useful for demolishing multiple airborne enemies, as well as enemies on higher platforms. I especially love using it against the fire throwing guys in Quick Man stage, and it can take down Sniper Joe mechs very well, though strangely it doesn't kill Sniper Joes themselves as quickly. Weird. The only issues I have with this weapon that puts it in C tier is that some enemies are straight up immune to it, like the gears that these gear hoppers ride on, and nearly every enemy in Bubble Man stage. And while it does do good damage against certain enemies, other enemies can take more abuse from the tornadoes, like the aforementioned Sniper Joes. Overall, not too bad, but it could be a little better. And that's all the C tier weapons. Now, we get to the B tier weapons. These are weapons that, while they aren't the strongest in the pack, are still quite effective. This is where you'll see a majority of the weapons in the franchise, with a grand total of 26 weapons. This is gonna be a long one, so buckle up. Number 61, Wave Burner. The best way I could describe this weapon is Fire Wave from Mega Man X, but more wavy. What this weapon does is shoot a stream of fire that moves up and down. While it doesn't do too much damage normally, it makes up for that by constantly hitting its target due to the lack of invincibility frames on the enemies. And it completely incinerates this worm mini-boss, which is greatly appreciated, though I wish it could destroy all the mini-bosses in this game. I don't like them very much. It could take down a lot of enemies pretty easily. I just wish it was a little more fun to use. I do think the range of this weapon could be a little better, especially against the Jet King Robo. And it's basically useless in Pirate Man stage, where all you can do is create air to push away enemies, and make these robot whales completely white, for whatever reason. But it's a pretty good weapon otherwise. Number 60, Silver Tomahawk. Another pretty decent weapon. You shoot out a tomahawk that goes lower at first, and then flies upwards. Kind of the opposite of Blazing Torch now that I think about it. It does dish out some great damage, and it's quite good at taking down enemies, and especially mini-bosses, not to mention doing wonders against that annoying piston boss in Mr. X Stage 2. I really like the damage of this thing, but at times the aiming is a little off for this thing. Sometimes I feel like I'm at the perfect spot to fire at an enemy, but instead I just barely miss them by a hair, wasting my shot. That being said, when you do land a perfect shot, it feels pretty satisfying to use, especially when it's done on enemies high above like the ones in Windman stage. Don't get me wrong here, it's still a pretty good weapon, and it does a good job destroying enemies, but it's just a little too precise for my tastes. I don't know, you could call it a skill issue on my part, that's just how I feel. Number 59, Rebound Striker. Finally a pretty good ricochet weapon. It acts similar to Gemini Laser or Crystal Eye, where you throw a ball that bounces around, which disappears after a number of bounces. You can also throw the ball diagonally up or down, and you're able to shoot 2 at a time. One thing I really like about this weapon is that for every bounce it makes, the damage of the ball becomes larger and larger. One strategy that I personally like to do is throwing the ball at the floor so that you get a head start in the boost of damage. Not only does that take care of the enemies that are either flying or attached to the walls, but it also helps in taking care of large enemies that are close to you. I do feel it's kind of held back by the amount of energy it takes. This one takes 2 bars of energy, which once again, doesn't seem like much, but for a weapon that requires precision and is not guaranteed to hit an enemy, you might potentially waste too much energy for this thing. Not a huge deal, mind you, but a hindrance nonetheless. Regardless, it's a pretty good weapon, and certainly better than Gemini Laser or Crystal Eye, but it still has a couple things that prevents it from being great in my opinion. Number 58, Saltwater. Okay, I wasn't expecting this weapon to get this high on the list, but after playing around with it for this video, it's actually more versatile than I expected. Basically, you throw this ball of water, and then little water sprouts pop out when hitting the floor or the wall. I know it doesn't sound or look that special, but one of the reasons why I put the weapon this high is because you can actually control how high you want to throw the water ball. You can either hold up to throw it towards higher areas for the enemies above, or you can hold down to throw it lower so that the drops can spread and get more hits on the enemies. That's not to mention the amount of damage it can do. It is surprisingly strong for a ball of water. This makes the weapon far more useful in certain areas, because you could plan out where to fire this weapon to dish out some more damage. Sometimes you could shoot behind the nearest wall to get multiple hits on an enemy because of the droplets that come out of it. Though of course, it isn't perfect. It is a little annoying whenever the water sprout hits the ceiling and disappears on you. In fact, it's also kind of annoying how this salt water doesn't split when it hits the ceiling, which was a very strange decision on their part. That would have opened the door for a lot of other fun ways to kill the enemies. It also has the same weird element that Crystal Eye had, where the smaller bits of water do the same amount of damage as the large one you throw. I'm not complaining too much because, like I mentioned, the damage is good, but it's still a pretty weird element. Still though, surprisingly solid weapon. Number 57, Tornado Blow. Our first real good screen nuke weapon. This weapon has you spawn a barrage of tornadoes that fly up from the screen, and most of the enemies that are on screen will fly up. Actually, now that I think about it, this weapon is basically a better version of Gravity Hold for the most part. This thing does a real great job getting rid of every enemy on the screen. Even shielded enemies like Mets aren't safe from it. And not only does it wipe out every enemy off the screen, it can actually lift you up to higher platforms, or go over long jumps that would require tight platforming otherwise. It does have one big issue that holds it back from being great. It's that it takes way too much energy to use this thing. 4 uses of it is enough to drain the entire bar, so you need to choose wisely when to use this thing. Hell, it doesn't even completely kill the robot it's strong against, even with full energy. Despite that issue though, it's a solid weapon. Also keep in mind, this is the first Mega Man 9 weapon on the list, and its weakest weapon is a pretty good screen nuke weapon that uses a little too much energy and makes you jump higher. This is only the first of what I believe is the best selection of weapons in the franchise, so be prepared. Number 56, Tengu Blade. This weapon probably has the most variety in terms of how it functions.
as this one has 3 different methods of attacking, 2 being close ranged and 1 shooting a projectile. So let's go over each of them. The first way of using this weapon is performing this dash attack similar to charge kick, simply by sliding as Megaman or dashing as base. I use this one the least because it has that charge kick and topspin issue where you're most likely going to damage yourself while trying to use this. Also, since you can't slide, you can't go under platforms while using it, so I personally see this method as a bust. The second way of using it is when you use the attack button with no enemies nearby, where you slash at the air and launch a projectile that flies up after hitting a wall. This one can be pretty helpful for attacking enemies that are either above you or at the edge of a platform you need to jump at. Finally, there's the third method, where you use the attack button near the enemies, which is just slashing them. This is by far the most efficient one, because this can destroy some enemies pretty quickly, and you won't have to worry about the energy getting low because you're pretty much guaranteed to hit your mark. I do think it's pretty lousy against mini-bosses, and it still doesn't do great against shielded enemies. Seriously, look at this. I'm right behind this fucker where he's completely exposed, and I still can't damage him. How is he still blocking? But I greatly appreciate the experimentation, and I can have some fun with this weapon every now and then. Number 55. Noise Crush. Geez, Mega Man 7's weapons are more solid than I thought. Noise Crush is quite good. With this weapon, you're able to shoot out little sound waves that bounce off the walls, and when one of them gets back to you, you'll be charged up and shoot a louder sound wave. One thing I absolutely love about this weapon is that it doesn't waste too much energy when you're charged up. It only takes 1 bar of energy just to shoot 1. Because of that, this weapon is pretty fun to use, and can be helpful for plenty of stages in the game. Also, fun fact, you can actually stun this Truck Joe with Noise Crush, and he goes down in just a few hits. I actually didn't know about that prior to testing this one out. This game is just full of fun little details, isn't it? Really, the only issue I have with it is that whenever there isn't a wall to reflect from, you're left with a kinda standard weapon with nothing all that unique. And if I were to improve one thing about the charged sound waves, I think they could benefit from some kind of piercing ability because of how loud they are. That's just my 2 cents. This weapon is good regardless. Also, you can cheese both Turbo Man and Spring Man with just 1 carefully timed shot with this weapon. I love this game, man. Number 54. Bubble Bomb. The next weapon we have here is living proof that a bubble weapon can work if done right. Bubble Bomb lets you throw a bubble that moves in a wavy pattern, and when it hits the ceiling or the wall, it moves alongside them until it either hits the end or its intended target. Some might think the wavy pattern might be a huge detriment to this weapon, and admittingly, the wavy pattern can be a little annoying at times since it isn't 100% accurate. But that being said, this weapon is actually good at hitting its targets. It helps that it has a pretty big hitbox, which greatly makes up for the wavy pattern. Also, the blast radius is actually pretty big for a bubble. And yet the bubble with the literal bomb in it has tiny explosions? Ugh. Of course, this weapon is also perfect for some airborne enemies, as well as enemies that drop from above, especially for the mini-bosses in Neptune and Pluto stages. Like I mentioned, there are times where it can be annoying to aim for certain enemies, and it's not as fun as other weapons in this game, but it's still solid nonetheless. Not much else I can say, except that this big bubble blows up the bad guys beautifully, and is basically a blast. Sorry for my poor attempt at an alliteration. Let's just get to the next weapon. Number 53. Copy Vision. What a fun and creative idea for a weapon. Basically, you spawn a holographic copy of yourself that only shoots straight forward. That alone is pretty cool, but what makes it even better for me is the fact that this hologram shoots pretty strong buster shots. Even more so than your regular buster, which, keep in mind, is about as effective as a pebble in this game. It's pretty helpful not only to take out enemies quicker either by itself or double teaming, but it's also great for luring certain enemies towards the copy and baiting them to get shot. That feature is especially great for these annoying cloud enemies in Tengu Man stage. And you might think that you would have to wait until the thing is disabled, but thankfully they actually made a smart decision to disable it by pressing the shoulder buttons, so if you timed your spawning of the hologram poorly, you could simply get rid of it with the push of a button. With that said, it does suck when you do miss your target and waste that energy. Plus, it's not really helpful for some of the smaller enemies like these jesters or these fire guys. And I gotta say, this is pretty useless against most of the mini-bosses in the game, since they're either constantly moving or attacking you in all sorts of directions. Seriously, words cannot express how much I hate the mini-bosses in this game. Pretty effective weapon despite that. Number 52. Concrete Shot. Ah yes, nothing like forcing your enemies to eat cement. With this weapon, you shoot a blob of cement that becomes solid once it hits the ground. But not only can it do that, it can also turn enemies into concrete blocks when they get hit by it. This chunk of cement is surprisingly powerful. It can take out nearly every enemy that gets hit by this thing. Even something like Sniper Joes can be taken down in one hit. And mini-bosses can be easily dealt with using this thing, sometimes taking around 5 hits to destroy them. It can also act as a platform for some of the more tricky platforming areas in the game. And it can even interact with the environments of some stages, like being able to solidify the lava lasers, which can be destroyed with a combination of Laser Trident, and blocking the laser gates in Wily Stage 4. This is a pretty fun and effective weapon. But with that said, it does have a couple kinks that holds it back from being great for me. For one, this is one of those weapons where you have to be careful with where you shoot it. Like if you shoot it in a tight corridor, you'll get stuck for about 3 seconds. And you also need to make sure to make your shots, otherwise it'll be wasted. And I'm incredibly sorry if I sound like a broken record here, but once again, I feel like this takes a little bit more energy than needed. This really isn't the kind of weapon that should take a portion of energy, especially for a weapon that doesn't have that much range. So it just feels more strict to use as a result. I think 1 pellet of energy would have been fine enough. I also feel like they could have done a little bit more with this weapon. I kind of wish the cinder block itself would affect the enemies in some way rather than just being an extra platform for Megaman. For example, when the block is dropped above the enemies, it just passes through them with no damage taken. I think it would have been really fun to freeze one enemy or projectile above, and crush the other enemy that's below. Whatever, it's still a good weapon that deals with enemies quickly. I just can't help but feel like it's being held back a little bit from its true potential. Number 51. Pile Driver. Yeah, this is another good close range weapon. With this weapon, you simply charge forward with a spike attached to your buster, and when you come in contact with an enemy or wall, it'll make a little explosion. With the power gear activated, it lets you dash further and lets out bigger explosions. One thing I'm a big fan of is how it can puncture pretty much any enemy in the game. Even the shielded enemies will pretty much be killed instantly when it gets hit by this weapon. The air dash is also pretty helpful for making platforming a little easier. It's especially a godsend in levels like Bounce Man or Acid Man stages. I do like the damage this thing can do, but sometimes it can be situational. Not in the same degree as something like Topspin or Charge Kick, but it still has some risks. For example, you have to make sure whichever enemy you're targeting is staying still, otherwise you'll just be taking damage. And even in rare instances, you'll still take damage even if they are standing still. It does have a little knockback after puncturing an enemy or wall, so keep that in mind too, otherwise you might get knocked into a pit. It's a pretty good weapon nonetheless. I could actually see this being used for speedruns of this game. I don't know if that's the case though. You can correct me if I'm wrong. Number 50. Black Hole. It's time to talk about one of the 2 black hole weapons in this list. The first being from Mega Man World 5, simply known as, well, Black Hole. This weapon is just as destructive as it sounds, and it is also just as fun as it sounds. You spawn a black hole, and after shrinking for a second, it then explodes into a spiral of projectiles, which kills nearly everything within its radius. I love that it can not only suck in tiny enemies, or even medium-sized enemies in a few occasions, but it also sucks in projectiles from other enemies, like the bouncing balls from these seal bots, and these trash cubes from these, well, trash bots. Though it does have a couple things holding it back from being the best screen nuke weapon. For one, it can be pretty situational in rare instances, because if you suck up an enemy that explodes, you'll most likely get hit by said explosion. And if I had to nitpick one thing about this weapon, it's that I do wish the projectiles were a little faster. Though, who knows, maybe it's a slowdown making it seem like they're slower than they actually are. Still though, this is a good weapon, though not as great as a certain other black hole weapon. Also, it gets put up here, because you could spaghettify the Wily machine with this weapon, skipping the second phase entirely. Man, I love when weapons steamroll Wily machines, no matter how weak they initially are. Number 49. Laser Trident. Okay, this one is going to be more brief than the other weapons, because with this weapon, you simply shoot out a laser trident, which can pierce through shielded enemies. That's it really. It's not that different from Yamato Spear from before. Though you might be wondering why this is higher than Yamato Spear. Well, to put it simply, I just like the damage this thing can do. And I especially really like how plentiful this weapon is. And while it does have the same idea as Yamato Spear, this one actually pierces through every enemy in the game, instead of just piercing through most of them. Again, I don't really have that much to say about this one. It's definitely more on the simple side, but it's very effective for what it is, and I like using it. Number 48. Block Dropper. This is a weapon I initially had much higher on the list. I seriously remember this weapon being much stronger than it actually is. With this weapon, you spawn 4 blocks at the top of the screen, which drops down on any enemies that are under. Using the power gear spawns a ton of blocks to do even more damage. I do want to point out that despite putting this weapon lower than I expected, that doesn't mean it's a bad weapon in the slightest. This thing can be very effective for the most part. It does a really great job taking care of airborne enemies, it can destroy the pilots of the Sniper Joe mechs, and it can defeat hordes of enemies with just a few drops. Best of all, dealing with most of the mini-bosses in a few hits. It's also really helpful for the areas where you're scaling up and clearing any obstacle that's in your way. And the power gear is especially good here since it dishes out tons of damage on enemies by making it rain stones on them. I just think the damage of the blocks themselves could be a little stronger. It can take care of small enemies just fine, but it doesn't kill the medium-sized enemies as quickly, let alone the large enemies. Again, I still think this is a good weapon, I just feel like it could have been a little stronger for an attack that involves dropping large bricks. Number 47, Gyro Attack. Wait a minute, I'm reading the script here, and do my eyes deceive me? There's a Mega Man 5 weapon on B tier? Why, yes it is! Gyro Attack is actually a pretty damn good weapon. You shoot this copter, and if you want to shoot an enemy above or below, you hold up or down on the D-pad to control where the copter can go. The damage of this weapon is actually really good and gives you plenty of ammo. And unlike Napalm Bomb, this weapon isn't just strong, it's pretty fun to use as well. It's actually very nice to take aim at an enemy and move the copter up and down at the right time. It makes for some satisfying moments like this one. Not to mention it's very helpful for taking down the enemies on higher floors. And, as you'd imagine, this weapon is perfect for airborne enemies. I mean, it's still ultimately B tier, because it doesn't really compare to the Charge Buster of this game. But still, this is the only Mega Man 5 weapon I can actually get some mild fun out of. Color me impressed, Gyro Attack. You managed to make it to the top half of the list. Number 46, Night Crusher. This is a very solid boomerang weapon? I guess technically, I don't know. With this activated, you simply shoot a mace that returns back to you. This is a weapon that requires a little bit of practice because of how the maces return back to you. It all depends on which direction you shoot it. If you shoot at the right, they move upward on their way back, and shooting at the left has them move downward. But once you figure that out, this weapon becomes way more fun to use. You could seemingly miss your target when trying to shoot it normally, but because of how it arcs back, you could still get a hit on them. And the damage on this thing is pretty great as well. It can kill multiple smaller enemies in a row, and it deals with larger enemies quickly. Plus, it's always nice to have a weapon you could shoot above, making mini-bosses easier to deal with. Again, it takes some time to get used to, and the maces aren't always accurate, but it's still a pretty fun weapon nonetheless. Number 45, Ice Wave. This is one of the better ground-based weapons in the series. It works similar to Search Snake, where you shoot a little icicle on the floor, and then it creates a spiky wave of ice that travels through the floor and even the wall. The main thing that makes this weapon more fun than Search Snake is that this one doesn't get stopped by the enemies. Whatever enemy it passes by, it will just continue along to demolish more of them. It can be pretty fun racing this wave to destroy a large amount of enemies in your way. It's also useful for taking out some enemies that are too low to hit with most other weapons. Though this really only applies for some stages in the game. It's not really too useful for places like Tengu Man stage, where most of the level is in the air, or Aquaman stage, where most of the enemies are floating underwater. And these oysters are actually pretty durable against this wave, which is kind of annoying. Still though, I do have some fun using this weapon. One more complaint, by the way. Why is a flying robot master like Tengu Man weak to a ground-based weapon? It's not as hard as it sounds, but still, the logic is kind of backwards here, don't you think? Number 44, Leaf Shield. Okay, before any of you light your torches, hear me out. Here's how this weapon works. You form a shield made out of leaves, and whenever you move in any direction, it fires in said direction. And while it can damage enemies, it can't really protect you from projectiles. Now based on that description, you would assume that this weapon would be completely useless, but it has one crucial thing that completely saves this weapon from being bad in my eyes. The damage this weapon can do. The amount of damage this weapon does to most of the enemies is massive. Nearly every enemy in the game gets killed in 3 hits at most with this thing, and half of the enemies in the game can die in 1 hit from this weapon. And there's actually quite a few areas where this thing can be really useful, like for the flock of birds in Crash Man and Airman stage, or the moles in Metal Man stage, and especially Wily stage 2. And while it doesn't shield you from projectiles, it does shield you from certain enemies like these tellies and tiny birds. Not only being useful to get through certain obstacles, but it's also a good way to quickly grind up some health or weapon energy. I mean, hell, when you stand completely still next to an enemy, you could use Leaf Shield multiple times without losing that much energy. Though, ultimately I can't really put it any higher, since it does have those two issues holding it back from true greatness. But still, I think this weapon gets an unfair reputation. Trust me, it's way more versatile than you would think. Number 43, Hard Knuckle. Now here's a weapon that packs a punch, quite literally. Hard Knuckle allows you to shoot your own fist at enemies. As you can imagine, it can do some unbelievable amount of damage to most of the enemies in the game. You can even control the fist up and down while it's moving. Most of the enemies go down with one hit from this thing. Even some of the more girthy enemies like Hammer Joes and the Big Eye stand-ins for this game. It can even take down mini-bosses easily in just a few hits. The giant snakes in Snake Man stage can be taken down in just 2 hits. Of course, having a punch that powerful has a couple setbacks. Since it is a heavy fist, that means the momentum starts off relatively slow, so you have to be careful with your timing for the projectile shooting enemies, and especially the shielded enemies, otherwise the shot would be wasted. Also, for some reason, while it does take out most of the enemies well, it can't take down the giant spring enemies fast enough, and somehow doesn't destroy the robot hedgehogs in one hit. Maybe teaching you that you shouldn't punch something prickly? I don't know. Good weapon otherwise. Number 42, Thunderbolt. This is a very simple but effective weapon. You simply fire a lightning ball, and when it hits a wall or enemy, it splits into 2 smaller lightning balls vertically in opposite directions. This weapon has a lot of ammo in store, and does some great damage on top of that. And because of the spread, this thing can give you a couple extra hits on an enemy, or if they're already destroyed, could possibly defeat an enemy above as well. And much like Freeze Cracker, it can actually interact with the environments around it, mainly in Junkman stage where you can turn on 2 generators, one that moves the platforms that now act as elevators, and another that activates the magnets on the ceiling. So it is useful for taking out enemies, but I won't lie, while it is strong, I do feel it's a little too simple for my tastes. I mean, all you do with this weapon is shoot a ball of lightning. It's essentially a charged buster without needing the charge. I generally prefer when weapons are useful as well as being fun to use. It's still a pretty helpful weapon, I just wish it was a little more exciting. Also, don't use it against Springman or Turboman. You'll only make them stronger. Like, literally the opposite of Noise Crush. Number 41, Ice Slasher. See, I told you it would only be up from here for the ice weapons. This weapon simply freezes whatever enemy comes in contact with it. Now, unlike Spark Shock, where you have to wait until it wears off in order to switch a weapon, Ice Slasher doesn't suffer from that issue at all. You could switch to whatever weapon you'd like after freezing an enemy, meaning you could demolish these big guys without worrying about their unpredictable jumping pattern. It could even help against reappearing enemies that can be annoying in certain areas, like these orb robots that shoot in 8 directions. You could even use it to freeze the fire streams in Fireman stage, usually to get past them easier, or in rare instances, as platforms to reach higher areas. Really the only flaw is that it doesn't do any damage on its own, despite the huge amount of damage you take when Iceman himself uses it. Which is strange. But still, it has helped me out a lot in several of my playthroughs of not only this game, but several other games in the series. You know what the funniest thing is about Ice Slasher? It's that this weapon basically fixed Spark Shock's problem before it was even made. Number 40, Ice Wall. Another solid weapon coming out of Megaman and Base. You spawn a big block of ice that you could push to harm enemies that are in your way. This weapon is incredibly helpful for the larger enemies you encounter in this game. It can dish out a lot of hits for any enemy that comes in contact with it. And hell, it's one of the few weapons in the game that can kill Sniper Joes efficiently. But not only does it damage enemies well, but it can also assist you to get on higher platforms, pretty much making this the closest this game has to Rush Coil, which is very annoying for this game. It can also help you plow through certain areas, and even assist you over beds of spikes if you stand on it while it's moving. It is one of those weapons where you have to wait until the ice block disappears, which I do think is fair for this weapon, since I imagine moving more than one block of ice would be annoying to handle, but still, it can sometimes feel like it takes forever to wait for this thing to shatter. Plus, you need to be careful where you place it, or else you might get pushed back either to an earlier area, or worse, into a pit of spikes. Not much else to say here, just a pretty solid weapon. Number 39, Tundra Storm. Man, there are a lot of ice weapons in this tier. This is the third one in a row. Anyways, this is a pretty good semi-screen nuke weapon. This one allows you to form a vertical icy cyclone around you that causes massive damage to the enemies within it. When using the power gear, it becomes a full-on screen nuke weapon and wipes out most of the enemies that are on screen. Don't really have a whole lot to say about this one. It's just a simple but pretty effective screen wiper. It's great for taking out the enemies that are above you, and in general makes some of the more annoyingly placed enemies easier to deal with. One cool detail I like about this thing is that it can temporarily freeze the firewalls in Torchman stage, giving you more time to avoid your fiery doom. Though ironically enough for an ice weapon, there's a temporary 2-second cooldown before you can use it again. Also, I mentioned that most of the enemies can be wiped out by this thing, because there are a few of them that can somehow withstand this gust of ice for a few hits. Plus this thing is surprisingly not great with mini-bosses. Yeah, that's really all I have to say. Just a good ice weapon. Moving on. Number 38. Water Shield. Ah, finally. The first real great shield weapon. See, I have a theory that after Mega Man 6, Capcom realized that the shield weapons of the last 3 NES games sucked ass. So starting at Mega Man 7, they made every shield weapon in the next few games worthwhile to make up for it. Water Shield is probably the weakest of the better shield weapons, but it's still quite good. This one has 8 water balls orbiting around you, which can not only be helpful to defend you from enemies and projectiles, but you can fire it in a spiral in whichever direction the shield is spinning. This weapon actually fixes an issue I had with Power Stone, where with that weapon it moves only counterclockwise. Here you can actually choose which direction you want the shield to move in. When you're facing right, it moves clockwise, and when you're facing left, it moves counterclockwise. That makes it easier to aim at enemies if you want to fire it. It works great as a shield as well. It does some good damage against the enemies, and can be used to take out larger enemies very quickly, as well as blocking projectiles. Though keep in mind, any enemy or projectile that does hit your shield will take away a sphere on contact, meaning that each chunk of water you lose will leave you more open for an enemy to attack. This also makes a spiral attack more tricky to use. Doesn't really hold it back too much though. It's still a reliable shield weapon, but there are even better ones to come. Believe me. Number 37. Bounce Ball. Really funny how ricochet weapons evolved in the franchise. We started off with a laser, then crystal balls, then a baseball, and finally a bunch of bouncy balls. And you heard me correctly when I said evolve, because this is the best of them surprisingly. Here you shoot 3 bouncy balls that bounce around all over the room. When the power gear is activated, you shoot 6 at a time. Damage-wise, it isn't really that strong, but where it lacks in damage, it makes up for that with durability. These balls can bounce around for some time. Don't take that out of context. Even when they hit an enemy, they still keep bouncing, repeatedly hitting the enemies over and over until the balls disappear. This makes it handy for enemies in cramped spaces, as you can blast them with a barrage of bouncy balls. Hell, it's just as useful in any enclosed room. Let those balls bounce around and spread some mayhem. But I'll be real here, this weapon is incredibly fun to look at. Seeing all these balls bounce around the room demolishing enemies fills me with so much joy. I mean, come on, look at this. It almost looks like a game of Arkanoid. You could even destroy these annoying generators in Fuse Man stage. With that said, this isn't too useful for areas that are more open, and the power gear is kind of lacking. And like I mentioned, the damage isn't too big. But I don't care, this weapon is just so fun to use. Not much else to say. Number 36. Scorch Wheel. Going back to the topic of underrated weapons, I feel like Scorch Wheel isn't talked about that much when discussing great weapons in the series. Basically, you spawn a fiery wheel around you, and after you either let go of the button or wait a little bit, the wheel will move forward, damaging almost any enemy that gets in its way. I sometimes hear people call this a bad weapon in the series, and if I'm being honest here, I could not disagree more. The damage on this weapon is really great. It can take down most of the enemies in one hit, and sometimes it could even mow down multiple enemies at once depending on how fast you move. I just find this weapon pretty fun to use in general, and find it great for taking down incoming enemies efficiently. I mean, it isn't really all that useful for some of the airborne enemies, and I do feel the flames could be a little further from Mega Man, since the enemies can sometimes still hit you even when the wheel is up. It's especially noticeable when compared to a certain other weapon in this very game that really overshadows this one in that department. I'll admit that this weapon isn't perfect, but I still really like this weapon. I'm sorry if it's too high for your liking, but I just find it fun to use. I don't know, you could say I have a scorching hot take, whatever. Number 35, Rain Flush. I gotta say, despite all the screen nuke weapons we talked about so far, it's kind of funny that they peaked with their very first one. Rain Flush has always been a favorite of mine from this game, and I'm happy to say that my opinion on it hasn't changed much. Simply put, you shoot this capsule in the air, and it causes acid rain to appear. It does a really good job washing away the enemies on screen. Any enemy that usually takes 3 hits or less gets taken out easily by this thing. And my favorite thing about it is that it can even damage shielded enemies while their guard is still up. That's not to mention, it could stay on screen for some time, letting you kill enemies right as they enter the screen. Though it does have a couple quirks every now and then. Like if you slide too much after firing, you could actually off-screen the capsule before it releases any rain. And if you fire it while high up on the screen, there might be a delay for the rain, or it just doesn't happen at all. Still, this weapon is very fun to use. Who knew that an easy robot master like Toadman can have such a powerful weapon? Also, here's an interesting thing that you can do. If you have some spare energy, after defeating the Wily machine, you can kill him while he's trying to escape by using this weapon, leaving you in this empty room until you restart the game. Neato. Whew, we're finally done with the B tier weapons. Now, we're at the A tier weapons. These are weapons that are close to perfection, but still have 1 or 2 minor issues that could be improved upon. This selection of weapons is slightly less bigger than the previous section. Instead of 26, there's 24. So yeah, it's still going to be a pretty big list. Let's get to it. Number 34, Hornet Chaser. Who knew hornets could actually be helpful? Usually, they're the spawns of Satan. This is another homing weapon in the series, only instead of being missiles, it's hornets. Getting the major flaw of this thing out of the way, the damage is pretty pathetic. These hornets are about as strong as your Buster. It still does a good job against small enemies, and they thankfully don't disappear after the enemy is defeated, but it's still not great against large enemies. But this weapon does one other thing that separates it from other homing weapons, and is the main reason why it's an A tier. The hornets can grab dropped items and can bring them back to you. Any loot that could come out of an enemy after it's defeated will immediately be grabbed by the hornet that killed it. And that fact alone makes this weapon so much fun to use. Yeah, I know it's kind of hypocritical of me to put Magicard way lower, even though it is very similar with not only the item snatching aspect, but also the pretty low damage. But the difference is that 1, this is a homing weapon, whereas Magicard can only be shot horizontally and vertically, and 2, the enemies in that game were incredibly durable, whereas this game is more fair with the enemy's health. What's also great is that this weapon is plentiful, and isn't too stingy with the amount of ammo it takes. Because of that, combined with the fact that the hornets bring items back to you, you could constantly get your energy back while shooting out these hornets. Seriously, while it's lacking in damage, it's completely saved by the efficiency of this thing, and just being really fun to use in general. I mean, come on, look at this clip and tell me that doesn't look really fun. I know there are weapons lower than this that can technically do more damage, like I guess Concrete Shot and Tornado Blow does destroy the enemies faster, but can either of those 2 weapons home in on enemies and steal their loot and give it to you? Yeah, I didn't think so. Number 33, Screw Crusher. Ah yes, the weapon from good old Punk. This is probably the most simplistic of the 3 Mega Man killer weapons. You just throw these saw blades in an arc. Now you would think something like that would be unreliable, but the distance the arc has doesn't really go too far. In fact, it can actually be really helpful for not only reaching the enemies on higher platforms, but to get some hits from down below. My only real complaint is that this weapon does as much damage as your Buster, but even then, that's actually not a huge problem for this weapon. See, normally this would be a huge complaint that would make any other weapon with this problem worthless. But this weapon actually does have one other thing that actually makes it more of a Buster replacement, and that's the amount of energy it has. You want to know how many screws you can shoot before 1 unit of energy goes down? 8 uses. Now multiply that with the amount of energy you have, that being 28, and you have a grand total of 224 screw crushers that can be thrown. And that's assuming you don't pick up any energy refills. So yeah, with that in mind, combined with the efficiency of this weapon, it's basically, like I mentioned, a Buster replacement. That's not to say it's perfect. Like I mentioned, it only does as much damage as your Buster, and there are a few rare instances where the saws will just go over the enemies because of the arc. But overall, this is a very solid weapon. I do think its original iteration on Mega Man World 3 was a little stronger, since it did a little more damage, and it could destroy multiple small enemies at a time. but that also has its own setbacks, like only being able to shoot one at a time on screen, and the fact that it moves slower compared to Mega Man 10. Either way, this weapon is awesome. Case closed. Number 32, Flame Sword. Okay, I will admit, this one is a bit of a biased pick for me, since this is more of a style over substance weapon. Don't get me wrong, it's still fun to use and does deal some great damage, but it doesn't deal as much damage as other weapons in this game. And there are faster ways overall, but with that said, oh my god, this weapon is just so fun to use that I just don't care. Despite what I said about it not taking as much damage as other weapons, that doesn't make it a weak weapon at all. I mean, as the name implies, it's a flaming sword. Why wouldn't that be a fun and powerful weapon? You can hack and slash so many enemies in the game, and this makes for some really satisfying ways to demolish them. There's even a chance where if you time your slashing just right, you could destroy multiple enemies. Seriously, look at how this blade can destroy these two whale robots in one swipe. Tell me that doesn't look awesome. Not to mention, it feels awesome slaying the mini-bosses and dealing a huge amount of damage to them. Especially the one mini-boss in Aquaman stage that I hate with a fiery passion. Again, I'll admit that this weapon is far from perfect, but it is just so much fun to use. Number 31, Wheel Cutter. Been a while since we've seen a ground traveling weapon, eh? With this weapon, you shoot a buzzsaw that you can hold on to for a while, and when you release the blade, it works pretty much like Search Snake or Ice Wave, where it travels through the ground and wall. The damage of this thing is pretty good. It's pretty effective as a ground traveling weapon on its own, but like I mentioned, you can hold on to it for a while, and you never have to let go. To be honest, I actually prefer doing this method over the ground traveling method. Don't get me wrong, it's a pretty good weapon in that aspect, but there's a slight delay to it that makes it not as helpful as simply holding it in front of you. But that's not the only thing you can do while holding the blade out. You can also travel up walls using this thing. There are lots of things you can do with this ability, which makes it incredibly fun to utilize. You could climb up walls faster without using the ladder, you can kill enemies quickly if they're nearby a platform, and it can even help you up the platforms with large gaps between them. You might say that's what Rush Coil is for, but come on, can Rush Coil do this? Yeah, no he can't. He's still a good boy though. Who's a good boy? Number 30, Firestorm. You know, besides Super Arm and Hyper Bomb, Mega Man 1's weapons are more solid than I was expecting. Case in point, Firestorm. At face value, it seems very basic. You shoot a fireball. Doesn't sound very special, but it has a secondary use as well. When you fire this weapon, you get this pseudo shield for a brief amount of time. It's surprisingly helpful. Not only does it take care of enemies that gets too close to you, but it's also great as an alternate way of attacking if you want to plow through the enemies without needing to aim at them. The fireball itself is good too. It deals a great amount of damage to a majority of enemies, including the Suzies, and especially these Picketmen and Gutsman stage. The only problem I have with it is that because this isn't a real shield, but rather one fast-moving fireball orbiting around you, that means it can sometimes give enemies an opening to hit you even when it's activated. It's not a huge deal though. I still get some use out of this thing. Number 29, Magnet Missile. Fucking magnets, how do they work? They work very well actually. Yeah, Magnet Missile is a very solid weapon. If you're familiar with how magnets work, it's pretty self-explanatory. When firing the magnets, they go up or down to its nearest target. This weapon is just so much fun to use. Not only does it have pretty great damage, but it's just great for reaching some of the more hard to reach enemies in the game. Not to mention completely demolishing annoying enemies like these dragonflies or these parachuting guys. It does have a couple things that holds this weapon back though. I feel like you aren't given enough energy for this weapon. It might not seem like much, but you have to keep in mind that Magnet Missile isn't always accurate with its targets. Don't get me wrong here, Magnet Missile does do its job well 90% of the time, but then there's that 10% where they miss their target because of how fast the enemies are moving, or in some cases, aiming at the wrong object, like the hammers thrown by the Hammer Joes. Other than that, it's a very solid weapon. Though they somehow ruined this weapon in the Wily Wars, because nearly every projectile attracts Magnet Missile in that game. Why? Why would they do that? Number 28, Shadow Blade. Here we have our final Mega Man 3 weapon. This is another boomerang weapon, where you throw this shuriken in 5 directions. At first glance, it seems like it's just Diet Metal Blade. I mean, you can only shoot one at a time, and like I mentioned, you only shoot 5 directions, as opposed to Metal Blade's 8. But then when you start using it, you notice it has plenty of its own qualities. For a boomerang weapon,
It has some amazing range. It can reach a surprisingly great distance, and can hit the enemies on higher platforms. Plus it does great damage to most of the enemies, especially the forklift mets and the snakes. I kind of wish you were able to shoot diagonally down in either direction. Would have made certain enemies below you easier to deal with. But hey, I'll take what I can get. It's still very solid. Fun fact by the way, did you know that every Robot Master in Mega Man 3 has their own weapon as a secondary weakness, including Top Man? Good luck trying that out. Number 27, Ring Boomerang. And wouldn't you know it, the next weapon also happens to be a boomerang. Only this one is shaped like a ring. Here you simply shoot a ring that returns back to you. Much like Rolling Cutter, this weapon actually pierces through the enemies, which is incredibly helpful for the ones that are shielded on one side, meaning you could shoot straight at them and still damage them. Actually, that kind of begs the question, why is a gold ring able to pierce through enemies, but not a shuriken? Whatever. Anyways, what really puts this weapon above the other boomerang weapons though, is not only the fact that it's a piercing weapon, but unlike Rolling Cutter, it actually hits your enemies multiple times, meaning you could dish out multiple hits on the robots, taking some of them down with just 2 rings. Though it doesn't mean you could kill every enemy in that amount. Some of the enemies are more durable against the rings than others, but it's still incredibly reliable. Also, special shoutouts to the Game Boy version of this weapon, where you can catch items with it. If that feature was in the NES version, it would be like 15 spots higher. Number 26, Flame Blast. Have you ever looked at a weapon in a game thinking, this seems really boring, and then actually tried it out more and found out it's more effective than you realize? That's Flame Blast for me. It doesn't look that strong when seeing it initially. All you do is shoot a tiny fireball, and when it hits the ground, it makes a little pillar of fire. It seems like a boring weapon at first glance, but once you start using it on the enemies, you then start to realize that it's actually way more useful than it seems, and it somehow becomes way more fun to use. Despite how small the fireball is, this can do a fuck ton of damage. Seriously, this weapon takes out most enemies in one clean shot, and even the large enemies only take a couple more shots, and they're down easily. Even the mini-bosses are easily disposed of with just 6 hits of this thing. That's not to mention, this weapon has some pretty great range, and on top of that, when you defeat an enemy with this thing, the flame doesn't go away, and it could possibly destroy another enemy within its range. The issue that's holding this weapon slightly back for me is that I wish the flame pillar lasted a little longer. It's not a big deal since the fireball does enough damage, but still, it would have been slightly more satisfying if you could kill enemies with them running into the flaming pillar. But it's not a huge deal breaker. Moral of the story here? Never judge a book by its cover. Number 25, Tornado Hold. I absolutely love this weapon, man. This weapon has you drop a propeller on the floor and makes a tornado that can not only kill enemies, but you can get in the tornado to fly up high. Right away I want to say what makes this weapon so great. The repeated damage this thing does. If I'm being honest, I don't know the exact amount of damage it does regularly, but that doesn't matter, because as soon as you drop this under any stronger enemy, they get wiped out extremely quickly. But not only can it destroy enemies effectively, it can sometimes block projectiles of certain enemies. It can even pierce through the shields of Sniper Joes. Sometimes. And as I mentioned, it can help you get to higher platforms, or pass through large gaps you couldn't reach otherwise when jumping normally. This feature is especially helpful in Astro Man's stage, so you could cheese his stupid mazes. You do have to aim pretty carefully, since you can only have one at a time, because if you shoot it under any platform that isn't far above it, you'll just get a tiny gust of air under there that'll possibly block your path. Also, it's pretty useless for the snowboarding and flying sections, but that doesn't really matter. I have so much fun using this weapon. It even gives you an animation of these tiny army men flying away. That's hilarious! Number 24, Plug Ball. God, both Mega Man 9 and 10 just showing off what a good ground traveling weapon is like. This one lets you fire a pink electric ball that travels through the ground. Now in theory this should be no different from Search Snake, but what separates this weapon from that one is that it can climb over the ceilings as well. That alone makes it better by default, but on top of that, it's pretty strong as well. It does a real good job taking out most of the enemies in just a few hits, and it's also really great for taking out a few mini-bosses. I also just adore how fast this ball moves. It just feels so satisfying shooting these electric balls in quick succession, destroying most of the enemies in just a few hits. And it especially feels satisfying killing them from a distance with the wall traveling mechanic, made even more helpful against some mini-bosses.
You could even kill the pit enemies before they even reach the same level as the platforms. I mean, I will admit, it's not too great with a few aerial enemies, but what makes this weapon really great for me is how little the energy cost is for this thing, giving you a total of 56 shots. This little fact solidifies this weapon as a great one for me. Not much else to say, just a simple but very effective weapon. Number 23, Remote Mine. Finally, a great bomb weapon, and one of the best in the whole series. With this weapon, you shoot out a bomb that you can control vertically to aim at your target, and when it sticks to an enemy or wall, you can detonate the bomb at any time to let out a 2-second explosion. So in a nutshell, you release your inner Demo Man. This opens the door for a lot of strategies that can make this weapon very fun and satisfying to use. You could simply stick it onto the big enemies and take them down with 1 or 2 bombs, or you could stick it to one enemy and lure them to more enemies so that you could destroy multiple of them at a time. I also really like the blast radius this thing has. Like, this thing can sometimes kill enemies right under the platform solely due to how big the explosion is. There are rare instances where the mine feels like it can move a little too fast for you to control. This is especially noticeable in the Crystal Gate area where it could take you multiple tries. And it still doesn't really do that well to shielded enemies, even if it's planted right fucking behind them. Finally, there's a part of me that wishes you could use 2 or 3 in total, so that you could dish out more damage. But hey, this weapon is still satisfying to use regardless of the amount. Number 22, Dust Crusher. Out of all the weapons that could have made it to A tier, I don't think anyone would have expected a trash cube to make it up here. I was genuinely surprised by how solid Dust Crusher is. Basically, you shoot a cube of junk, and when it hits your target, it splits into 4 little pieces shot diagonally. The main idea with this weapon is that it would enable you to hit other enemies with the debris after hitting your target. But because the enemies don't have invincibility frames for this weapon, the debris actually causes extra damage to the enemy you shot at, which means they can be taken out way easier than you would have expected. More than half of the enemies in the game can get absolutely decimated by this weapon in 1 or 2 hits. And this makes certain mini-bosses very easy to deal with, like the whales, which can be taken down in 5 hits. So let me get this straight. You're telling me that a cube of garbage is about as strong, if not stronger, than a fucking bomb? Ugh. It does have a tiny issue that I have. Sometimes the damage can be slightly inconsistent. Like there are some enemies that can take 2 hits, and sometimes those same enemies take 3. Still though, despite being made of literal garbage, this weapon could never be described as such. Number 21, Scramble Thunder. Basically what happens if you multiply Plug Ball by 2 and give it a little explosion in the process. This weapon lets you shoot out a little ball of electricity that you can either shoot up or down. When it hits the floor or ceiling, it splits into 2 and travels around the area until it either hits an enemy or projectile, gets off the screen, or if done on a platform, disappears. On contact with any enemy, it makes a small electric explosion. The power gear allows you to have large electric balls traveling through the ground and going through any enemy it comes in contact with. Firstly, I really like how long the electric explosion lasts. It's only there for a couple seconds, but it's able to damage any enemies that are nearby the explosion. But more importantly, I really like how reliable this weapon is for reaching enemies, whether it's dealing with airborne enemies, ceiling enemies, or even killing enemies 2 platforms above to make sure nothing is blocking your path. It's especially helpful with the power gear upgrade, which like I mentioned, could decimate every enemy that's in its way. One other thing that's cool is that you can give yourself a minor delay when you're falling, which can be really helpful for some of the harder platforming sections. Though I do have a couple complaints. Firstly, the energy cost is a little stingy. Not enough to ruin the weapon, of course, but I think it could have been a little more fair if it only took 1 unit of energy. And one minor complaint, I do think the hitbox for this weapon could be a little bigger. Also, don't use it in Bounce Man stage. You can kill some enemies, but because some enemies of the stage are made of rubber, it makes it impossible to kill them with this weapon. Still though, this weapon is awesome. Number 20, Acid Barrier. Another great shield weapon that's part of Capcom's apology for the last 3 NES shields. When using this weapon, you activate a shield made of acid that protects you from projectiles, and while it's activated, you can shoot chunks of acid at your enemies. When using the power gear, you get an even stronger shield that not only damages enemies, but also turns projectiles into small drops of acid that can hurt the enemies. Yeah, let's be real here, you'll never use the normal shield. The upgraded shield pretty much does everything the normal shield does, but better. And it doesn't even cost that much more than when you normally use it. It corrodes any small enemies that gets near it, the small pellets of acid can take out multiple enemies, And even the acid shots are stronger. You do have to be careful though, because taking damage from any larger enemies due to contact damage will make you lose your shield immediately. While the powered up shield is fun, I do wish the regular shield had some kind of element that the stronger shield had, but to a smaller degree. Like maybe have it shoot 1 drop of acid when a projectile hits it, or at the very least damage the enemies in contact. Whatever. I still think this is a very fun weapon to use. Number 19. Spread Drill. Easily my favorite weapon for Mega Man and base. With this weapon you shoot out a big drill, and when you press the attack button, it splits into 2 drills, and when you press it one more time, it becomes 4 little drills. That is a fun enough concept already, but my favorite thing about this weapon is that the bigger drills do more damage than the small drills. This is the kind of mechanic I was referring to back when I talked about Crystal Eye and Saltwater. Not only that, but they handled it in a pretty smart way so that the big drill isn't too overpowered. Because while the big drill does more damage, it doesn't have that much reach, and while the smaller drills have less damage, they can reach much further than the big drill. Again, that's a really smart way to balance this weapon. You can use the big drill for the enemies closer to you, and you can use the tiny drills to reach the enemies that are not only further away, but even for the enemies that are above or below you. It can even be used strategically. Like for example, you can have a big drill fall down for the enemies more below, and when it's at the same level as them, you can unleash the tiny drills. It might not do as much damage as Remote Mine, and it still isn't great with mini-bosses, but god, it feels so much fun to use. Like I mentioned, for all the issues I have with Mega Man and base, the weapon selection ain't half bad. I mean, 6 out of 8 weapons from this game made it to the top half of the list. Not too shabby. Just wish they weren't in a game full of annoying difficulty spikes. Number 18. Thunder Beam. And here we have the clear choice for the best weapon in Mega Man 1. With this weapon you shoot 3 bolts of lightning, with 1 in front of you, 1 above, and 1 below. Because of that mechanic, this makes enemies that would usually be hard to reach with any other weapon a complete joke while using this one. I can't count the amount of times this weapon saved me from enemies that are just below me. On top of that, it does some great damage as well. It can take out multiple smaller enemies in a row, and you're given plenty of energy for this thing, so you could use it for the entire level if you'd like. Also, like I mentioned before, this weapon can destroy specific blocks that Super Arm can use, in which the debris actually damages the enemies, once again making Super Arm completely obsolete. What's keeping this thing from S tier is that despite having a pretty good hitbox, sometimes the wavy pattern of the bolt can cause you to miss your targets. Oh come on, seriously? And it does make for some annoying slowdown at times. But that doesn't detract this weapon at all from being great. It especially gets points for being the weakness of the Yellow Devil, so that automatically gives it a boost to A tier, because fuck that guy. Number 17. Junk Shield. Okay, what is it with Mega Man and making literal garbage weapons really strong and useful? Especially since the previous 3 shield weapons before this was figurative garbage. Wanna know what this one does different from other shield weapons? Well, for one, it doesn't disappear as soon as you touch a projectile, so already it's in the lead. Also, it doesn't go away when you go to a different screen. While it doesn't really protect you from projectiles, that's made up for the fact that this shield can damage enemies really well and has a great amount of endurance. You can plow through a large chunk of enemies for a good portion of a lot of stages, and it's just really fun to use. And this thing is perfect for large enemies and mini-bosses as well. It only takes 3 to 5 shields to destroy them. Look at this sturdy polar bear being taken down by 3 junk-filled shields. Though sadly, it's not as perfect as I once thought it was. Don't get me wrong here, it's still a very fun weapon that I love to use, but it has a couple things holding it back. For one, I'm not really a fan of how easily it can be destroyed on simple things like these ticking bombs and these dinosaurs. And I almost forgot to mention that you're able to shoot the trash in multiple directions, but it's pretty hard to tell where they'll go when you shoot them. Despite that though, I always have fun steamrolling enemies with this weapon. It's one of the best shield weapons in the series, despite those couple issues I have with it. Number 16. Grab Buster. Okay, this is probably the weapon that could never be any lower no matter how hard it tries, because of how the mechanics for this thing works. Wanna know what this one does? You shoot a blinking piece of energy, and whatever enemy it hits, steals their health. And that right there is all you need to know on why it's so high up. That is such a ridiculously cool and fun idea for a weapon. This is a great way to fill up energy while saving up on E-Tanks. Notice your health is down, but want to save the E-Tanks for the boss? Well, bust out that weapon and grab some energy from enemies. I find myself switching to this weapon often in the first half of the game.
Like, even if it took 1 point of damage to the enemies, it still would have been a low B tier at least. Thankfully, it does do some pretty good damage, killing some of them in 3 hits. The only flaw I could think of is that there are a few times where it could be a tiny bit annoying to get these health pellets flying around you, but that doesn't happen too often. Good God, what a fun weapon. Seriously, whoever thought of the idea for this weapon should get a huge raise. Number 15. Black Hole Bomb. Fitting how we go from one space weapon to another, it's kind of similar to Remote Mine, where you shoot out an orb that you can control vertically while it's moving forward, only this weapon has 2 differences, one being that the orb moves slower than Remote Mine, giving you more time to aim at the enemies, and 2, instead of exploding, it spawns a black hole. This thing is just so satisfying to use. It can consume nearly every enemy in the game, including the seemingly invincible floor enemies, which is made even better from how much reach this black hole has. Any enemy that gets within 2 feet of this thing will be sucked in. Not only that, but it can protect you from projectiles too, so even if you open the black hole too early, you'll still most likely be fine because it'll just consume the projectiles from any enemy. It was close to being an S tier weapon, if it wasn't for one thing. It doesn't do repeated damage among larger enemies. I just wish the black hole would score multiple hits on them. It doesn't even have to be constant damage. You can give it a slight cooldown for 1 or 2 seconds since the black hole stays there for a while. Regardless, I still absolutely adore this weapon.
A beautiful chaotic masterpiece.
Number 14. Chain Blast. Of all the weapons I initially underestimated in this list, this has to be the biggest one of all. Basically, you shoot out these bombs that sticks on the enemies, and when there's multiple bombs closer to each other, they can make a bigger explosion, with 4 being the limit. The power gear grants you a giant bomb, giving you a huge explosion quickly. Believe it or not, I actually had this weapon in C tier in my first draft, below Rolling Cutter. I initially wasn't a fan of the timing for the detonation, where it takes 3 seconds until the bomb blows up, and I thought the power gear was too simple for my tastes, despite being effective against mini-bosses. I was ready to call this another mid-bomb weapon along with Napalm Bomb or Danger Wrap, until I remembered one other detail of this weapon. You can manually detonate them by holding down while pressing the attack button. This one extra mechanic single-handedly moved this weapon from low C tier to high A tier. It opens a lot of doors for a lot of really satisfying ways to use this weapon. You could shoot 4 at a time and then detonate them to take out a large chunk of enemies, or you could shoot multiple of them in different spots and detonate some smaller explosions to take out a group of small enemies. It can even destroy the blocks in Blockman stage. That's a neat little detail. Again, I seriously underestimated this weapon so hard. I do wish some of the explosions were a little stronger, like somehow this Picket Man didn't die from 3 bombs combined, and I still think the power gear is a little too simple for me personally. But god damn, what a fantastic weapon! I deeply apologize for doubting you, Chain Blast. I was not familiar with your game. Number 13. Homing Sniper. This weapon is basically a heavily upgraded dive missile. It behaves pretty similarly. You shoot a missile that homes in on your targets. On its own, it does some good damage, and you always know where it's aiming, indicated by these crosshairs on whatever the missile is targeting. It's a pretty solid weapon, but there's something else that this weapon can do that Dive Missile cannot do. You can charge this weapon. What happens when you shoot that, you may be asking? Well, it releases a whole barrage of missiles, which can not only take out whatever enemy they're targeting, but if they're defeated and there's a few more missiles to spare, it finds the next enemy that's on the screen. This weapon is extremely useful, not only for wiping out enemies on the screen, but even for the upcoming enemies on the screen. Sometimes you could even detect them the split second they appear. But surely there's a catch to this charged shot, right? You shoot about 5 or 6 missiles when charged, so I imagine that the amount of ammo it takes is the exact same amount as the missiles, right? 2 units?! Okay, yeah, I'm sold on this weapon. By the way, I'm not counting out the single shot either. While it's not as useful as a charged shot, it's still pretty useful for testing out where your shots will go on certain shielded enemies, like the Sniper Joes. There are a couple enemies that for some reason won't get detected by the missiles. Seriously, the dragon is right there. But again, those are rare instances. This weapon is absolutely amazing to use. Number 12. Electric Shock. Here we have my second favorite close-range weapon. That is in a shield, obviously. Simply put, you fire a beam of lightning out of your hand, And while the range on it is a bit small compared to other weapons, the damage this thing can do is astronomically strong. Seriously, it seems like this thing can demolish almost everything it touches. Most enemies go down in 1 or 2 hits, and it absolutely steamrolls mini-bosses. It's basically like having Force Lightning in a Megaman game. It is insanely fun to use, and makes you feel like a god striking down at your foes. Fitting, since Jupiter is the god of thunder. And while I said the range was smaller compared to other weapons, that doesn't mean the range is bad at all. It can actually reach enemies pretty well. There is just one thing I wish this weapon had, and that's the ability to run while firing the lightning, since you need to stand still while using it. Granted, you can jump while using it, but that's not as fun as running, you know? Also, it has a couple enemies that are somehow more durable against it, like these magnet-looking guys. But again, those are just a few enemies. This weapon is fantastic regardless. But not my favorite weapon in Mega Man World 5. That honor goes to... Number 11. Spark Chaser. This might be a one-stage only item, but god damn it is it one of the best in the whole series. Basically, you shoot this beam that homes into your enemies, similar to dive missile or homing sniper.
Now, what separates this one from other homing weapons?
Well, to put it simply, it's unstoppable. When it targets an enemy, it won't stop scoring hits until it's dead. And once that enemy is done, it'll most likely find another enemy nearby. This thing is just awesome. It's just fun watching this thing shave away health on the enemies, and even a few bosses. Keep in mind, it won't be there forever once you do shoot it. Eventually it disappears, but it stays around for the right amount of time. Just enough so it could destroy your target. Though sad to say, this weapon can't get much higher because it is a one-stage only item. Which is a damn shame, because if this item was available to use in any stage, this probably would have been in the top 3 at least. It is that awesome. I pray that Capcom at least makes a weapon that's in the same vein as this one. Please, Capcom. A concept for a weapon this good should not be limited to just one stage. Number 10. Jewel Satellite. Fittingly, for our final A tier, we have our final shield weapon on the list. You spawn 4 diamonds that orbit around you that can block projectiles, and you can even throw the shield by pressing the attack button again. I'll get to why I love this weapon in a second, but real quick I just want to say that this weapon was so damn close to getting to the S tier section, but it just has one tiny itsy bitsy flaw. It doesn't do that much damage. Don't get me wrong, it does handle the smaller enemies just fine, but the slightly larger enemies take a few more hits on this thing. Some of them can be killed by the projectile deflecting, which is cool, but others don't shoot projectiles that bounce off the shield. So, yeah, it might not do the most damage in the series, but I don't care. I just love using this thing. It's like it took most of the best attributes of other shield weapons, like the deflecting bullets of Mirror Buster, the unlimited small enemy killing of Leaf Shield, and the shield shooting of Star Crash. It just feels so amazing running through a stage with this activated, bypassing any projectile and small enemy that gets in my way. And like I mentioned, you could deflect bullets of larger enemies too, and because you could shoot the shield, it leads to satisfying moments like this. If it just did a little more damage, then it would have easily been an S tier. But hey, number 10 on the list is still a passing grade. In my opinion, the best shield weapon in the entire series. And now, the moment you've all been waiting for. The S tier weapons. These are weapons that practically have nothing truly wrong about them, and are pretty much perfect. Any possible complaint I can muster up for these weapons would be very, very minor nitpicks. And not only are they incredibly useful, but they're also incredibly fun to use. So let's get to my top 9 favorite weapons in the Classic series. Number 9. Slash Claw. It's really fascinating that out of all the close range weapons in the series, from fiery swords to lightning bolts, my favorite one of all is the one where you simply swipe your arm. Besides a couple enemies, this thing demolishes nearly every enemy in one hit. You can demolish a whole row of these flying enemies, and hell, you can even slash through the shields of enemies, making the shields of Sniper Joes feel like nothing. And by God does it feel fun when you go through a whole level just cutting down every enemy that gets in your way. The damage of this thing is just magnificent. And I think this might be due to the sprites being pretty big in this game, but for a close range weapon, this weapon has some damn nice reach. Even though it does less damage when you hit them further away, it's still incredibly fun just being able to attack an enemy that seems too far to reach, only to realize that you could actually make that distance with the claw. That's not to mention that this thing can demolish some large enemies like these Truck Joes and the Polar Bear robots in just a few swipes. I do wish it was slightly stronger against a few mini-bosses, and while the range is great, there are a couple areas where the claw won't reach far enough, but god, those are few and far between. Easily, in my opinion, the best close-ranged weapon. Number 8. Flash Stopper. Say, what happens when you take Time Stopper from Mega Man 2, and use that idea again, only this time it's actually good? You get Flash Stopper. And when I say good, I mean fantastic. Like Time Stopper, this weapon freezes time and prevents any enemy from moving, but it has one crucial thing that separates it from Time Stopper. You're able to attack while the enemies are frozen in time. Crazy concept, I know. This single addition makes this the absolute best time manipulation item in the franchise. Literally every enemy gets frozen for a short period of time, and they're stuck for a fair amount of time. You can kill enemies while their defenses are down. You can shoot the shit out of large enemies without them having anything to do about it. And hell, some of the enemies just cease to exist just by using this sucker. This also helps tremendously for mini-bosses. That ring mini-boss in Ringman stage? No need to worry about timing when time has stopped. The Snail and Toadman stage? Won't have those eyes shut when there's a blinding light flashing in those eyes. You could kill the whale mini-boss even before it properly spawns. And yes, using it against Pharaoh Man is absolutely hilarious. Look at him. I'm just shooting him down, and he can't do anything to stop me. I kind of wish you were able to switch your weapons while this was activated, but I'll gladly take what I can get. And the best part is, this isn't even the best Mega Man 4 weapon. Number 7. Solar Blaze. This is one of 3 Mega Man 10 weapons in S tier, which goes to show how solid the weapons are in this game for the most part. Anyways, with this weapon you shoot out a little sun that stops for 1 second before exploding into 2 fire waves that blast horizontally, and it explodes immediately when it comes in contact with an enemy or a few projectiles. And when I say this thing demolishes nearly everything, I mean nearly everything. It blows up large enemies in just a few hits. Shielded enemies are no concern when the blast can go through them. It can even take out multiple enemies at a time, not only because of the 2 directions it can go, but also because it penetrates through enemies. I mainly love how wide the fire waves are. You could seemingly miss your target, but when that little sun explodes, it will destroy them from behind. It even takes a reasonable amount of energy, that being 2 units. That's a fair amount for a weapon this strong. If I had one tiny complaint, I personally would have loved it even more if you were able to shoot 2 at a time so that it can destroy enemies even faster. But that's incredibly minor. This weapon rocks regardless. Number 6. Magma Bazooka. This weapon basically asks the question, what if atomic fire was a good weapon? And it provides that answer beautifully. When you shoot this weapon normally, you shoot out 3 little fireballs that spread out, but you could also charge this weapon to shoot out 3 giant fireballs. Now I will admit, I had this a little lower on the list on my first draft. Don't get me wrong, I considered it an A tier weapon, but I thought the charged shots, while very strong, can sometimes miss their mark because of how fast the fireballs can spread out. That wasn't until I decided to experiment with the smaller shots, and doing that made this weapon far more useful than I initially thought. Now the smaller shots obviously don't take as much damage as the charged shots, but the energy cost is much smaller, only costing half a unit of energy per shot. Also keep in mind that once again the enemies in this game don't have invincibility frames, so you could get close to an enemy and take them down in 1 or 2 shots of the uncharged bazooka. It can even take out hordes of enemies because of the spread. I realized that the best way to use this weapon is to use the charged shots at the correct times, only using them either for more durable enemies such as the mini-bosses, and using the smaller shots for the smaller enemies. I gotta say, that is an incredibly well-crafted way of having the small shots have as much value as the charged shots. Might not be in the top 5, but I think this is one of the most cleverly designed weapons in the series. Well done, Magma Bazooka. Well done. Number 5. Triple Blade. This one basically takes the previous weapon, which was already amazing, and makes it even better somehow. When activated, you shoot out 3 blades, with 2 of them moving horizontally. When standing, they move upwards, and when jumping, they move downwards. I absolutely love the damage this thing can do. Combine that with the spread of the blades and how big of a hitbox they have, and you could wipe out an entire room with just a few shots of this thing. Not only is the damage on this weapon great, But much like Magma Bazooka before, this weapon laughs at the idea of invincibility frames for enemies. It can take out nearly every enemy in the game with just a couple hits, and it can even pierce through the projectiles and destroy the enemy that shot it. Not to mention, this thing absolutely demolishes mini-bosses. You could get close to them and spam the hell out of this weapon to kill them in mere seconds. Did I mention as well that shooting this thing only takes 1 unit of energy? Because that's another pro to add to this long list of great things this weapon has. I honestly don't have any real complaints about this weapon. I guess much like Magma Bazooka, the spread in rare instances can cause you to miss your targets, but that's an incredibly rare occurrence. Absolutely amazing weapon, and my favorite original weapon for Mega Man 10. Keep in mind, I said original. Number 4. Metal Blade. Come on, we all knew this weapon was going to be an S tier. Anyone thinking otherwise would be lying to themselves. Anyways, I'm sure a lot of us know what makes this weapon fantastic, but for the 5 people that don't know, let me list the reasons. 1. You can throw these blades in 8 directions. 2. They do some great damage. 3. You can shoot multiple of them at a time. And 4. The amount of energy it takes to use these blades is very tiny. With all of those qualities, it makes for a weapon that practically replaces the Buster for most of the game. Nearly every enemy in the game can be taken down with this thing, and because of the fact that you can shoot this weapon in 8 directions, you don't have to worry about any enemies that are too high or too low. I mean, you know this thing is overpowered when it's the weakness of half the robot masters in the game, including Metal Man himself. Really, the only nitpick I have is that while it does do a good job against 98% of the enemies, there is that 2% that's immune to it, like the Sniper Joe mechs or these floor enemies. But that's not a big deal. And yeah, it definitely does overshadow most of the weapons in this game, including your Buster, but that's mainly because half of the weapons in this game suck. It's not really Metal Blade's fault for that. Plus, like I mentioned, there are a couple weapons that handle certain enemies better than this one does, so I don't see it as a complete replacement of every weapon in the game. Really, what can I say about this weapon that other people haven't said before? It's just phenomenal. Number 3. Blade Cracker. I'm honestly in awe of this weapon. So let's mix it up a little bit and talk about how it was in its original iteration in Mega Man World 4 first. This is a weapon that's acquired after you beat Blade. It's a bomb weapon which you are able to shoot in 8 directions in this game. Yeah, thought Metal Blade was the only weapon that did that? Nope, this one does too. And it is amazing in that game, even if you can only play it in one stage. Not only because of the fact that it can be thrown in 8 directions, but the damage the explosion can do, and the blast radius, is just amazing. Being able to destroy every enemy in that game, and making the fight with the last 2 phases of Wily a satisfying breeze to deal with. And that perfection of this was kept intact for Mega Man 10. And now that it's free to be played in every stage of that game, rather than just being limited to one stage, you get to see more of its true potential. I think the only real quote-unquote downgrade this weapon got for this game was the fact that you can only shoot in 7 directions now instead of 8. But does that affect the greatness of this weapon overall?
Nope.
It is even better in this game than the game it came from. It still has that amazing damage, it still has that great blast radius, and all of that makes for a weapon that makes you feel like a god when using it. The bomb also moves very fast. This helps when targeting the enemies because you'll pretty much get a direct hit almost every time, and even if it misses, there's a good chance the explosion next to them will hit them too. Every enemy is helpless against this thing. Large enemies can be taken down with only a few shots, mini-bosses can be taken down very easily because of the ability to throw upward, and even shielded enemies can't handle the explosions from the blast radius of this thing. I seriously can't think of a single thing that's truly wrong with this weapon. I guess sometimes the pausing while shooting can be a little disorienting, but that is extremely minor. Easily the best weapon from not only Mega Man 10, but the Game Boy games in total. Though this is a close second to my favorite bomb weapon in the classic series, as that title is given to none other than... Number 2. Flash Bomb. This, right here, is what Crash Bomb wishes it could be. For this weapon, you shoot a grenade straight forward, and when it comes into contact with anything, whether it's an enemy or wall, it will cause an explosion that lasts for 3 seconds. One thing to keep in mind, by the way, is that the enemies in this game don't have invincibility frames. Combining that aspect with some great damage basically means that nearly every single enemy in the game can be destroyed in one shot of this weapon. and I do mean about 99% of enemies. And as if that wasn't strong enough, the blast radius on this thing is so big that it can demolish multiple groups of enemies, big or small. Even if you shoot at a shielded enemy, the explosion damages them without them even popping out. You can shoot a Sniper Joe straight at his shield, and it would still kill him with just one shot of this thing. And on top of all that, you can shoot 2 at a time. Like, just shooting one of these things is enough to completely steamroll an enemy. But adding 2 on top of that just makes an already overpowered weapon even stronger. It's also wonderful for steamrolling mini-bosses and destroying their projectiles. The only very tiny complaint I have is that it isn't very useful for the snowboarding segments and the first part of the flying segment in Tengu Man stage, because the explosion stays on the spot where it was detonated. Even then, there aren't that many of those sections, so you could use this weapon for 95% of the game. I adore this weapon more than words could describe. This is easily the best bomb weapon in the series. But despite my love for this weapon, I have to give the gold crown to none other than my favorite weapon in the classic series, which is number 1, Pharaoh Shot. Honestly, I truly don't know where to start with this weapon. Pharaoh Shot is truly an anomaly of a weapon. Like, a Mega Man weapon this amazing should be impossible. It's basically like if you took the concept of atomic fire and combined it with Metal Blade with a pinch of Firestorm and cooked it just right. This is another charging weapon. When you charge this weapon up, you get a fireball growing over your head, and this fireball can actually defeat some enemies above. It's genuinely a more effective shield weapon than the actual shield weapon of the game. But that's only the beginning of how good this weapon is. I haven't even talked about the shot itself. The damage this weapon can do is staggering. Practically every single enemy in the game can be taken down in one shot with this weapon. And even for the 2% of enemies that don't get taken down in one shot, well, it's not that much of a problem either, because those guys only take 3 shots at most. This thing can take down most of the mini-bosses with no problem at all. One of them can be killed in one hit. The only mini-boss it's slightly less powerful against is the Whale mini-boss, which takes the same amount of shots as Dust Crusher or Ring Boomerang. You're probably thinking, oh, what happens if I lose the fireball at the top? Will I lose the charge? No, not at all. You can still make your charged shots, you just won't have a fireball over you for it. Did I mention that this thing can shoot in 6 directions? Because, yeah, that makes an already fantastic weapon even better. Because now you can shoot at enemies above or below with your charged shot. And you want to know the best part of this weapon? The charged shots only take 2 pellets of energy. That is incredibly generous for a weapon this amazing. Even the tiny shots have some value to them. While not as strong as the charged shots, it's still helpful for taking out smaller enemies quickly because of the angled throws and dealing with some of the more annoying shielded enemies that would counter your charged shot. Just, holy shit, dude. I almost want to believe this weapon was programmed by the sun god Ra himself because of how godly this weapon is. I don't have much else to say. This is a masterpiece of a weapon, and without a doubt, my favorite weapon in the whole classic Mega Man series. And there you have it, folks. All 109 weapons in the classic series ranked. I gotta say, it was really interesting looking at how these weapons evolved over time. You can tell that there were some balancing issues during the NES days, whether they made them too strong and overshadowed most of the other weapons like Metal Blade or Thunder Beam, or made them completely useless like Spark Shock or Super Arm. Saying that though, checking each of these weapons out one by one gave me a whole new appreciation for some of them. Seeing weapons like Leaf Shield or Chain Blast being far more useful than I initially thought was pleasantly surprising to me. And despite a couple duds like Wild Coil or Chill Spike, you can tell that when they got to 7, that they were working on balancing out these weapons and making sure that each of them had advantages that other weapons didn't. I mean, it's pretty telling when 6 out of 9 S-tier weapons came from 7 and beyond. Well, 5 if you don't count Blade Cracker, but it's used more in 10. I really look forward to seeing what kind of weapons Capcom will cook up in Mega Man Dual Override. Hopefully they'll be as fun as some of the best weapons listed here. And again, I would love to know in the comments if you guys would like if I did more Mega Man videos like this one. I had a lot of fun making this list, and I would love to hear your personal opinions on some of these weapons. If you disagree with a few of my placements, I would like to keep it civil around here, because I'm aware I have at least a few unpopular opinions here. Nonetheless, I'm happy you wanted to hear my thoughts on these weapons, whether you stayed tuned for the whole video, or if you just skipped ahead to see what my favorite weapon was, or to see where your favorite or least favorite weapon was placed. Regardless, I'm happy you tuned in. Maybe you could leave a like and subscribe to see more of my rambling. Regardless, thank you for listening, and have a great day.